All right, we are back live, coming back from our lunch recess. We are starting late, which is never advisable. The time is 1:38, I believe, 1:39. As folks watching online and in the room may recall, Representative Baer asked to add 2 new bill drafts to the agenda item. So for the public will not be able to follow along, as those items are not on the agenda or part of any month's meeting materials. But LSO staff is prepared to provide a quick high-level overview of those 2 bills. And so we can turn it over to Mr. Fuller, I think, or anyone else from LSO on House Bill 270. Are you prepared?
Yeah, Madam Chairman, and both of these bills are on the LSO website. They are under the 2025 session bills and can be accessed there as well.
Thank you, Mr. Fuller. And that's House Bill 270 and 271?
Yes.
Thank you.
So 2025 House Bill 270 simply would have changed the annual spending policy amount for the Permanent Mineral Trust Fund from 5% to 4.5% of the previous 5-year average market value. House Bill 271 did the same for the common school account. Slightly different structure as it passed the House. That spending policy amount would have gone from 5% to 4.75% for fiscal year 2026. And then each fiscal year thereafter, the spending policy amount would have been 4.5% of the rolling 5-year average. House Bill 271 also amended the distribution of certain federal mineral royalties for certain amounts. This is 94601D6 for amounts that would have gone to the School Foundation Program account instead of going directly or entirely to the Common School Reserve account. That specific distribution of federal mineral royalties would have been divided equally between the reserve account and the Common School account corpus.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Fuller. Any questions from the committee about these bills?
Madam Chairman.
Representative Baer?
Thank you, Madam Chairman. What I was really hoping to do was to hear, each year that we delay changing the spending policy, and this has been attempted before. Obviously, we just discussed about 2021. We repealed an opportunity to drop these spending policies. But each year we delay, there's an opportunity cost based on money not going into our reserve accounts, those reserve accounts not being able to be invested in a more aggressive manner to get a higher rate of return, and then therefore affecting the cash flow in the long run. And I think that opportunity cost has been discussed in the past. I think Mr. Fleming is here. He has discussed that ad nauseum in the past. And I'd just like the committee to have an understanding of what each year that we let go by without adjusting that spending policy, what is the opportunity cost to the state of Wyoming? If we could ask him to, I know that Ms. Scott had done an analysis, but I think because Patrick has done this analysis in the past, he could give us a real good insight just for the committee's knowledge going forward.
So with the understanding that when we put more into savings, that we can earn more on investments, wonderful assessment of the analysis. Mr. Fleming, are you prepared to provide a breakdown beyond the fiscal note that's attached to House Bill 270 concerning the reduction of our spending policy for the Permanent Mineral Trust Fund?
Madam Chair, I have no this is obviously what you decide to do. What I can do, though, is quantify the opportunity cost of what the investments would be. But obviously, there's two sides of it. But if you would like me to go over the numbers of what we're talking about, I can just briefly tell you what those historically have been over the last 5 or 10 years.
Mr. Fleming, let's start with why the spending policy is currently at 5%. Do you know?
That is statutory limitations, which you all decide to do. As I testified before, then Treasurer Gordon, we had it from 5 to 475 to 4.5, which was then repealed. But that's, as I said, that's not my position, obviously that's yours. I can just state to you what the numbers are and you decide what you're going to do.
Go ahead and tell us the numbers, thank you. And if you can, maybe, I mean, we could do 3 and 2% too, and see how much more we can earn off those revenues too. I mean, I think it'd be a bigger number. So I'm just being a bit,
Madam Chair,
I'm being a bit
absolutely.
facetious.
Yeah,
but-
so that's the point of, obviously you need to know where all the buckets are and where you have a shortfall and how much you spend and so forth. But as you're saying, anytime, just like savings accounts, when you're spending the money, you're not able to earn interest on it. And by savings, you're going to get a higher return. But just for instance, just looking at it saying, okay, well, what would be your option? And so Representative Bear was talking about putting it into the spending accounts. So right now, when you're looking at it, it's like 50%, the reserve account asset allocation right now is about 50% bonds, 50% equities. So what we can do is say, okay, what were the last 10-year returns or last 5, pick your number, I don't care. And I can give you an approximate number of what that number would have been. So just for instance, 10 years, equities returned approximately 11.5%. And so if you're putting it into the reserve account, you're saying, okay, 50%, 11.5, you're taking 5.75, and 50% fixed income, which is about 1.5%, 1.26, 7.75. So that would be slightly over 6% would be the return if you put it into the reserve accounts over the last 10 years. So to do a fair assessment, you would say, okay, that money, whatever it was over those period, and I know Polly has them, I can't do the mental math to do the compounding of what over the 10 years, that number, because it's not only 1 year, but it's compounded over those returns to do a fair assessment. So it would be significantly higher than 6%. And if you put it into the PMTF, which is 70% approximately our reference portfolio of equities and 30% of bonds, the 10-year return on equities is, as I said before, was 10.5, but now you're using 70% instead of 50, so 70% of 11.5, 77 is 805. And the bonds we said were 1.5, and that's 30% of 1.5, which is 0.5, so 805, or 8%. Rough and dirty, approximate. So one would be 6% if you put it into the reserve accounts, and another would be 8% if you tipped it into the PMTF. And so you can just look at that and obviously, take your percentage of the money. If it's 0.5%, you take the amount of money that we had over those times and compound it by that percentage over those 10 years, and that would give you the number.
Senator Crum.
Yes, Madam Chairman, my question would be, with the 5% spending policy today, with the earnings on the account, have we been able to cover the cost of inflation as far as the corpus that, put back into the account? So let's say I'm just 5% spending, inflation was 3%, we made 10, so we've covered the cost. Have we been able to do that type of thing over a long period of time with this account?
Madam Chair, Senator Crum, no, the only way that we have inflation-proofed the fund has been with the mineral income. So the fund, especially, as we said, the 6.3, for instance, over the last 20-odd years, inflation has averaged approximately 2.6%. So you're looking at a 5% spend, add on the 2.6, so your 7.6% is what has been taken out, and we earn 6.3. So you're clearly at a lower number over a 10-year period. But because of the mineral income that we've had, we've been able to inflation-proof the fund through the tip from the mineral income that has been tipped into the funds.
Thank you.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. I was just going to add some clarifying comment to that. We do have that inflation coverage, as Mr. Fleming stated, based on the revenues coming into the account. but not based on the return of our investments. But the House Bill 270 and 271, where we're bringing those additional non-spent funds back into reserve accounts, we have a spending policy on those reserve accounts where there's automatic drafts coming off them. But prior to your joining the legislature, we had, I believe it was House Bill 89 in 2024. We set it up a goal to get to 5X and 7X volume in the account greater than the spending policy.
Yeah, Senator Garou? Thank you.
Thanks, Madam Chairman. First, I'm gratified to hear that my friend here is espousing something that I believed in for a long time. And I know a lot of members of this committee believe too, that if we can do things to help our investment vehicles, to help us raise more money on our investments, the better it is. I think that we've made attempts at that before, many. We try to go to 5X and 5X, and we've worked hard to do that. We've met with some resistance, but we've come a long way, and we all appreciate the help with that. I think that we put money into savings in the past 2 years. The Senate led the way, 1.4 billion, and last night, a lot of folks, we met a lot of resistance, but we got it done, and I'm very proud of that. I'd like to entertain this. We did entertain these bills last session. We didn't approve them. I'd like to talk about them more. It'd be great if we've got a staff report. That's great. But I think the procedure is that we go through the chair, put it on the agenda so we can have a robust discussion. I'd like to look forward to doing that at a subsequent meeting. Thank you, Madam Chairman.
Yeah, so earlier this morning, I think the committee may recall that I indicated to staff that we would bring up the discussion of reserve accounts. And I think that's really the topic for which this bill falls under, because what we're trying to do here is not put this money away into the permanent funds, but for the reserve accounts is really the result. And the reserve accounts can always be rated. And so the Senate has always taken a much more conservative position concerning those reserve accounts, which is why we directly appropriated into the permanent funds $1.4 billion. And so the Senate takes a much more conservative fiscal position when it comes to savings and making sure there's monies in those permanent funds to ensure we have that return that we have experienced in the past. So on our next agenda item will be on the reserve accounts, where this conversation, I think, is probably appropriately held to understand how those reserve accounts work and how they interplay with our spending policies. So I look forward to hearing from Mr. Fleming at that time. I look forward to our LSO staff being prepared to provide explanation on the reserve accounts. And we can dovetail this conversation on House Bill 270 into that conversation of reserve accounts. Thank you. So with that, we're going to move forward with our agenda item number 7, the governor's veto of Senate File 169, Strategic Investments and Projects Account Repeal. Heavy lift after lunch. Thank you, Mr. Fuller.
Okay, Madam Chairman, members of the committee, there are 4 items in your meeting materials associated with this topic. The text of the bill is 7-01. The veto letter for Senate File 169 is 7-02, and a brief LSO summary, 7-03. A fourth document that contains various tables outlining the fiscal impact of Senate File 169 with the line item vetoes is 7-04 in the materials. I'll just cover 3 topics with this. The law pre-Senate File 169, the enrolled version of that act, and then the current state of the law after the line item vetoes. So the Strategic Investments and Projects Account was created in 2013 in the supplemental budget bill. It was later codified in 2015. Then in 2017, the State Penitentiary Capital Construction Account within SIPA was created, and state law provided an annual $10 million transfer from SIPA to the State Penitentiary Capital Construction Account to take place annually until July 1st of 2038. Before Senate File 169, any earnings from the Permanent Trust Fund that were in excess of 2.5% of the previous 5-year average market value of the fund and less than or equal to the spending policy amount for the fund was required to be credited to a SIPA and the Legislative Stabilization Reserve Account, the LSRA, in equal amounts. And then another important aspect of the law pre-Senate File 169 is that the state treasurer is required to transfer an amount from the PMTF reserve account equal to the difference between the maximum amount that may be credited to SIPA and the amount actually credited to SIPA. So in other words, the PMTF reserve account serves as a guarantee of the amount that must be transferred to SIPA every year. So then 2025 Senate File 169, as enacted by the legislature before the governor's actions, the primary purpose of that bill was to repeal SIPA effective July 1st, 2026. The reason for 2026 was to have that date align with the start of a new fiscal biennium. Similarly, 2025 Senate File 169 repealed the transfer that was required to be made from the PMTF reserve account to SIPA. That guarantee was also repealed in this bill. Another aspect of the bill was to split off the state penitentiary capital construction account to be a standalone account, and then the $10 million annual transfer, instead of coming from SIPA, would have come beginning July 1st, 2026 from the general fund. The bill provided that on July 1st, 2026, any funds that remained in SIPA would be transferred to the general fund. The general fund would assume any obligations that were on SIPA, and any reversions that were or are required to go to SIPA would instead go to the general fund. There are also two additional amendments to Senate File 169 that were adopted during the process that are important to note. First, an amendment provided a $10 million transfer from SIPA before that account's repeal to the Department of State Parks and Cultural Resources for the state shooting complex. And then second, there was a $9 million transfer from the State Penitentiary Capital Construction account to the Department of Corrections for purposes of integrating the department's security system. For both of these transfers, there was language provided that the funds could not be transferred or expended for any other purpose. The governor, in reviewing 2025 Senate File 169, exercised line item veto authority. And here are the effects of the action. So first, the governor reversed the repeal of SIPA. Second, the entire act, rather than having a split effective date with those two transfers being effective immediately and then SIPA being repealed July 1st, 2026, the entire bill took effect immediately upon the governor's actions. Here are the impacts and effects of that veto. The required $10 million transfer from SIPA to the State Penitentiary Capital Construction account will continue coming from SIPA, just as the law existed before Senate File 169. Then another change that was made through the line item vetoes, and this was a change not made or contemplated during the legislative consideration of this bill, was that any earnings in excess of the 2.5% of the 5-year average market value of the PMTF will be credited entirely to SIPA rather than SIPA and the LSRA in equal amounts. So that was a strike that the governor added to make that change to the distribution of those funds. The tables that Ms. Scott provided outline the fiscal impact of those changes in dollar amounts as a result of that change. One effect of this change is effectively to increase the available revenues that are available to be recommended in a budget. The LSRA is expressly excluded in statute in 921013 D2 as available revenues that could be subject to budget requests and recommendations. Then, Madam Chairman, another effect of these line item vetoes is that by changing that kind of excess of the 2.5% going entirely to SIPA, is that the transfer and the guarantee of the PMTF reserve account now guarantees that entire amount going to SIPA versus the half and half arrangement. So this would have a fiscal impact on the PMTF reserve account as well. In other words, the PMTF now guarantees a larger percentage to SIPA. Another change with the $9 million, or excuse me, with the governor's line item vetoes is with the $9 million that was going to come out of the state penitentiary capital construction account. That language was modified with the pen to now state that the state auditor is required to, and I'll quote from the bill, to transfer the Wyoming State Penitentiary Capital Construction Account to the Department of Corrections for, and this is from the bill as enacted, for purposes of the department's security system. With the line item vetoes, no specific amount is specified in the act to be transferred. And then again, this entire act takes effect immediately. With that, Madam Chairman, happy to answer questions.
Any questions? So we're in a quagmire. Representative Nicholas? Thoughts?
No, actually, I kind of enjoyed it.
No discussion?
Madam Chairman,
Yeah. Karen?
I have someone online who would like to provide comment.
Okay, great. Bring him in. Do you know who it is?
Madam Chairman, Senator Hicks is online.
Senator Hicks, you'd like to comment on your bill?
Well, thank you, Madam Chairman. I believe you were a co-sponsor on that bill, so I'd appreciate that. But, obviously we're left in quite a dilemma here. This substantially changed the bill and changed the appropriations and redirected the funds. Discussion you've had about the reserve accounts and the purpose of the reserve accounts. But the net effect of this line item veto, if we allow this to stay in statutes the way it currently is it zeroes out the reserve accounts. And so back to the whole conversation about lost revenue and opportunity costs and stuff. It's a significant transfer of funds. It seems to me, and I know that there's been some discussions within Management Council, but it would appear to me that we need to correct this back to what the original legislative intent was associated with this bill, and that would just make a suggestion that maybe the committee might entertain sponsoring this bill again to bring it back for the next session and correct many of the, what I would say, redirection and appropriations by the governor and the line item veto. But Madam Chairman, clearly that's a discussion for you and the committee to have, but this has significant long-term fiscal impact when you look at our long-term fiscal profile. Not only is it going to have a significant reduction in the LSRA, it's going to zero out the permanent mineral reserve account within about 1.5 to 3 years, depending on investment returns. And so anyway, just wanted to provide a little bit of editorial on that, but certainly I think this is an issue that this committee has got the expertise to evaluate this, but I certainly think that that'll be part of the discussion as to re-bring this bill back and get a clean bill to the governor that can't be artistically modified through the line item veto. Thank you, Madam Chairman, members of the committee.
Thank you, Senator. Why don't you stay close by, Senator Hicks, if you can. We're going to go back to LSO and provide maybe a more thorough analysis of the SIPA account, if we can do that.
Madam Chairman, if you would like, I could walk through your handout of the tables 7-04 in your packet.
That'd be wonderful.
Would you like that?
Yeah, unless we have plenty of time, and I think this is really important because it's something we actually have to deal with. And so this isn't discretionary and not something we can just move through as an agenda item after we get the report. So we have to take action today. So let's get our heads in this and get some solutions here, because we'll have to have a bill on this for session. Polly, if you could proceed.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. Polly Scott, LSO, Budget Fiscal. I'll be walking through this handout that you have in your packet. I'll be starting with the side that's white and orange. Sorry, the pages are not numbered. First of all, I just want to say that all of these tables are based on the January Craig forecast, which does not include any realized forecast of realized capital gains. And because we are about 2 weeks away from the end of the fiscal year, we know that we are anticipating capital gains. So we know at least fiscal year '25 in the forecast is going to look very different than it does in these estimates. Nevertheless, the estimates are still useful, and so I can walk through them. Okay. If it would be all right, I'd like to kind of start off with a refresh of the spending policy amount that is in existence prior to any changes. So the spending policy is 5% for the PWMTF, with 2.5% going to the general fund, guaranteed by the reserve account. And then any investment income above that, 2.5%, is split equally between the LISRA and the SIPA. But then additionally, the SIPA is guaranteed to go up to the 1.25%. So, and this is of the 5-year average market value. So our guaranteed spending policy amount is 3.75%, and the maximum spending policy amount is 5%. Additionally, the SIPA retains 55% of what its portion is and transfers 45% to the School Foundation Program account, or the SFP. Yes?
Oh, Ms. Scott, on that topic, if 45% gets transferred to the school foundation account, what happens if we repeal SIPA?
Madam Chair, in the Senate File 169 as it was enacted, the amount that was going to the SFP was also going to go away. So that kind of went together.
And so approximately how much was that annually? I mean, I know this is a bit unanticipated.
No.
But
It's right here.
annually to the school foundation account, that would be
It's right here.
reduced. Yeah.
Right here in your table. So we'll walk through the totals of Table 1 and just walking through those totals. For the 6-year forecast period prior to any changes, the LSRA was going to get 124.1 million estimated. The SIPA was going to get 451.4 million, retain that amount, and then also transfer 369.4 million to the SFP. And the reserve account over this 6 years was going to support this spending policy amount structure by transferring 696.6 million over the 6 years. During, this timeframe and with this spending policy structure that existed before the 2025 changes, the duration of the reserve account was estimated to be beyond the 6-year forecast period. So that's how it was starting out. And so then the second table shows what the legislature passed with Senate Enrolled Act 98. Okay, so first off, it was designed to take effect starting in fiscal year '27. So the changes were not going to start until then. There's still the 2.5% guarantee to the general fund, and then the investment income above 2.5% was going to go entirely to the LSRA or the LISRA starting in fiscal year '27. So more was going to go to the LSRA and nothing was going to go to the SIPA or the SFP starting in fiscal year '27. So, just walking through the totals there at the bottom of Table 2, and let me know if you want me to speed up or anything like that. The LISRA is going to receive more. It's going to receive 191.6 million. The SIPA is going to receive 136.3 million, less than, so less than prior. And also the SFP is going to receive $111.4 million. The reserve account is going to be relied upon less, and it's going to transfer $191 million estimated over this 6-year period to support this spending policy amount. Okay, and so Table 3 shows you just that, shows you does that subtraction for you. And so basically, in brief, the LISRA gets more, the SIPA and the SFP get less, and the reserve account is relied upon less. That's comparing it to what the legislature adopted. Okay, so flip the page and go to the page that has yellow, green, and blue on it. And at the top, we've got the law as it is now. And so as Mr. Fuller said, the governor's veto made the law effective immediately. So the spending policy amount becomes 5% guaranteed by the reserve account. And that's 2.5% to the general fund and 2.5% to the SIPA, with the 45% to the SFP also being in effect. And then nothing's going into the LSRA or the LISRA. And so walking through the totals on this one, over the 6-year period, the LISRA is getting 0. The SIPA is getting $574.2 million to retain, and then also transferring $470 million, or that 45%, to the SFP. And the reserve account is supporting this spending policy by transferring $795.9 million. But I want to point out that starting in fiscal year 28, the reserve account can't guarantee the full amount, and it falls short by about $60 million. And then in fiscal year 29 and 30, and of course, I want to emphasize these are estimates, the only amount that is available to go to the SIPA and the SFP is the investment income above the 2.5%. And so that the shortfall in those years is 265 to 270 million. So as Senator Hicks did state, that the estimate is that the reserve accounts is depleted somewhere in fiscal year 28. So the duration of the reserve account, prior had been beyond the 6-year forecast under, the legislatively adopted Senate Enrolled Act 98. That duration became even longer because we were relying on it less. Under this law, the duration of the reserve account has become about 3+ years. Okay. Yes.
I'm just curious because that's assuming that we have to tap into the reserve account because we can't reach the spending policy. Is that accurate?
Madam Chairman, absolutely, that's accurate. I mean, if something happens to and we know that the estimates are always different from the actuals, and we know that they will be, then this will all be different. So like, for example, in fiscal year 25, we probably are not going to have to use reserves. But because we're basing this on the Craig forecast, that's what we're showing. So yes, there is a difference between actuals and estimates.
And then just to follow up, as passed out of both houses, what was the ultimate impact on funds available to the school foundation account? Because it was, my recollection was roughly $111 million impact. Is that?
Yes, as it passed out of the legislature, if you go back to Table 2, on the first page, it was going to be, or actually Table 3 shows you it's going to be a reduction to the school foundation program of $258 million over the 6-year forecast period, estimated.
Thank you.
Yes.
I'm sorry, can you say that one more time?
Yes. Senate Enrolled Act 98 would have an estimated result of reducing the amount to the school foundation program of $258 million over 6 years. Is that it? So less going to both SIPA and the SFP.
Thank you. Treasurer Meyer has raised his hand. Treasurer Meyer, come on forward.
I think I can add another column in here that would probably make this a lot easier to understand and function in the future. Essentially, I'll make the observation that the Permanent Mineral Trust Fund Reserve Account is acting like the LSRA should. I think that's a true statement, because
Say that one more time.
that the PMTF Reserve Account is acting like the LSRA should. And one thing that happened this year, and I've talked to some of you during the session of what money was going to come across into the LSRA, that we were going to have to write a check for about $362 million. And that was a Section 300 from the previous year that directed us to do this, that basically when our unrealized capital gains were booked from last year, it would flow across into the Section 300 to fund the LSRA. So my suggestion would be take the PMTF reserve account entirely out and let it function for what it was supposed to do, and then use the unrealized capital gains that haven't been booked and put them into the LSRA. Part of the budgeting problem that I see that's going on is that early in the system, you're spending money you don't have. And then you're trying to catch up with wherever you can so you can spend it in this year's legislative session. So essentially, we just have to, like I say, get rid of the reserve account, put that where it's supposed to be, and then the money that was going to be going over and flow to the LSRA, let it go ahead and flow to the LSRA, but let the reserve account stand on itself rather than putting more pressure on it than what it can afford to bear. And then the unrealized capital gains after the first of the year can flow into the essentially the legislative stabilization reserve account, and it can fund the school foundation program, and you can let SIPA go away and breathe this last breath. So that's just, my observation about what might be cleaning up the books and getting them straight on that. So, and we could be directed next year, to make sure that everything balances out, that after the first of the year, when realized capital gains become available, they're immediately distributed first to the school foundation program account for any shortfall, and then to the LSRA, in an amount that's available. So that might be some way that we can actually get rid of the reserve account and have the structure work where I think it's probably, you get rid of something that's being used in the wrong way, and let us fund after the first of the year when it becomes available, so you can actually fund the things that stabilizes the revenue.
Thank you, Treasurer. Stay
you.
close as well. Good thoughts. Representative Nicholas, I believe you created some of this. Please account for your conduct.
Actually, there are other issues, but with the general concept that the treasurer just talked about, I think is the right direction we need to go.
So Representative Nicholas, do you have a motion based on the recommendations from Treasurer Meyer, which, just reading the committee, I think there's some people feel that's a pretty elegant solution.
Well, I would be happy to work with the good treasurer and for our next meeting, provide a draft of what that would look like.
Well, let's conceptually make the motion, and we'll work with LSO based on the conceptual motion to do that, rather than privately working and bringing a draft. So that way there's buy-in now based on Treasurer Meyer's piece. So I think what we'd like to do, these are big picture concepts for LSO, so forgive me for being so big picture. I think it's the will of the legislature to eliminate the SIPA account.
Not all the legislature.
But I think the reason why there is objection to the elimination of the SIPA account is because there's not a full appreciation of the consequences of its elimination. And so if those consequences are addressed through other mechanisms, then the elimination of the SIPA account is no longer a concern. And the elimination of the SIPA account is important, I think, to the legislature as a whole in order to simplify and provide transparency to the budget process, because the SIPA account has been butchered. It's been tortured in its purpose and no longer serves its intended purpose, creating a transparency issue. And I don't think the majority of the legislature appreciated their vote this last session because they didn't understand its impact on all of the accounts for which SIPA has been obfuscated for. So that's the motion conceptually. I mean, that's the why we're doing what we're doing, why we'll advance a bill eliminating SIPA for the purposes of transparency to the budget, a mechanism to continue to provide funding for that shortfall into the school foundation program that never should have been used to back it up.
Madam Chair.
Senator Guru?
Well, I'll second the motion, just so procedurally we'll get where you want to go. But just so I can comment, some of us did understand the consequences of what the action was, and all we were trying to do, or at least, I guess I'll just speak for myself, that makes it easier. What I was trying to do is say, and I think what some of us felt, I guess, was that by eliminating SIPA, then when it comes to school foundation funding, that we know what we're funding, where the kind of the way it was kind of something that was just below the surface, and it was an automatic. And so we wanted to kind of draw a light and say, this is where this is going, and we want it to be an overt action by the legislature to do it. If this intermediate step of writing something still highlights it but calls it out, if that garners more acceptance with the body, so be it. But we can argue that part out when we see the draft. But at least that's where my mind is right at this moment, to say, yes, let's draft it and let's highlight it, but let's have that discussion. But I think it's something, as you said, we have to do this. We need to do something.
Yeah, Ms. Scott?
Madam Chairman, I believe there currently is in statute a backstop for the school foundation program with the LSRA. So it backstops that account to bring the balance back to $100 million in any given year. So I just wanted to share that with you as you're considering possible bills for drafting.
Something to that?
Mr. Fuller?
Yeah, Madam Chairman, just to note, it's 94219B that provides that as of June 30 every year, transfer from the LSRA to bring the balance of the school foundation program account to $100 million. That was unchanged in Senate File 169, unchanged with the governor's vetoes. So that still remains law and would have remained the law if SIPA had been repealed.
So there's a motion and a second. Further discussion? Senator Hicks?
Yeah, Madam Chairman, I think you guys are headed in the right direction. I appreciate the staff bringing that up. So I just want to clarify with the treasurer, when he says to get rid of the reserve account, I think what he meant was get rid of the 1.25% guarantee that the reserve account provides to the SIPA. And so the reserve account stays. What the bill did was get rid of that guarantee, so that money just stays in a reserve account. So it basically, it's off on its own. There's no longer any obligations. And I do appreciate staff, the way that money flowed was to go to the LSRA, and as staff pointed out, already backstops the school foundation program. So
Yeah, I think that's.
if you wanted to divert those additional unrealized capital gains, that backstop still stays in place I think we all understand there's a looming $700 million or $600 million deficit with the school foundation program by the time we get out to biennium. It's another way to try to soften that, but then it becomes an auto appropriation. It just absolutely flows in there. One of the things that we had discussed, at least in the Senate chamber, was, we need to kind of see where that money goes and then see where that deficit is. We could always just raise that cap on the LSRA on what that backstop is versus diverting unrealized capital gains that becomes not very transparent in the big scheme of things. And so it's just another alternative.
Yeah, I think, Senator Hicks, I think that's right. And I think your clarification on eliminating that diversion is what the treasurer was indicating, and he's nodding his head yes. Any discussion about that? Is there any different opinions about that? And then I do think that for our next meeting, we look at a more robust discussion on increasing that backstop from the LSRA in understanding that deficit to the SFP. And so we have a more thoughtful discussion about that, because this is such a complicated account. Representative Nicholas. You tied the knot very tight. So I think this is a good start. And I would ask that Representative Nicholas work with staff and the treasurer and anyone else who's interested, including Senator Hicks, to kind of unravel the situation we're presented in from the governor's veto, further refine the Senate file, and have a clear process for how to thoughtfully eliminate the SIPA account, which is a tortured beast at this point. Any further discussion?
Madam Chair, I just have a question. Is there a motion or a conceptual motion in the works right now to have a bill draft to eliminate the 1.25% guarantee to the SIPA, or
Yes.
something else?
That is correct.
Okay, thank you. And then Representative Nicholas is going to work with staff and to refine that,
And Senator Hicks.
and Senator Hicks.
They work well together to untangle this knot
Thank you.
with the treasurer. Thank you. Senator Beitman?
Madam Chairman, half tongue-in-cheek, half serious, do we need to have this bill drafted in such a way that it can't be line item vetoed? As we've discussed, changing our bill drafting policies to basically protect it from line item vetoes with hiding stricken language and not allowing that this to ever happen again?
Mr. Fuller?
So Madam Chairman, Senator Beitman, what made this bill subject to a line item veto were the amendments that added first the 10 million transfer to the state shooting complex, and second, the transfer to the Department of Corrections. That was the multiple appropriations that made this subject to a line item veto. As introduced, the bill would have been only subject to either a veto or enactment.
All right, further discussion? I think this will require a lot of work on our parts in fully understanding and appreciate, so we can educate our colleagues, because it took a lot of years to get it this messy. It's going to take a bit of time to clean it up. So with that, we'll move on to our next agenda item. Thank you, Ms. Scott. Okay, the time is 2:30, and we're on to item number 8, investment performance update. We have Mr. Simpson from the Treasurer's Office, or we have Mr. Fleming coming forward.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Mr. Simpson is out of the country on a trip, so I'm filling in on this one. Do you all have the performance report that you can see? Perfect. Okay, so this is the document that I'm going to be speaking from. And I would like to First, for some of you that are not familiar with it, if you go to page 3 to just look at the size of the various funds, this is a great document that if you want to look at it, it's put out on a monthly basis if you want to follow it, but that just shows you the current size. So we're right now at 30.95, so basically $31 billion is the total size of the fund. And then if you move to page 7, so I'm just going to highlight, Madam Chair, is it okay just kind of highlight this? Because this is an interim report. So what does that mean on the interim? Remember when I was talking about the delayed return from the alternatives, that we don't get those for approximately 3 months or so? So this does not have the up-to-date returns on those alternatives, which is a big part of our total return. But anyway, the PMTF on a one-year basis, you can see is the 8.6% return, common school 8.8, and workers' compensation, I'll just highlight some of the big ones at 7.5, and then obviously the LISRA, which is a big one that we look at, would be the total fund was 8.5, but that's split for some of you that are not familiar, some of you that are not familiar how that works, is what we did is we took, because we have this short-term reserve that makes sure that we have that minimum 500 million that is a necessity. That's a backstop that we have. So that's invested in more short-term bonds, which obviously is going to have a different return. And that's kind of highlighting the difference that we've talked about before between a portfolio that's predominantly bonds versus equities. And so the long-term reserve, as you can see, is the 12.5%. And then the short-term reserve, which was the 6.6. So that's kind of the big picture of where we are for the year, and you can look at financial year to date or fiscal year to date, month to date, whatever on that one. But that's kind of the gist of the big picture or the short-term picture. The big picture, which I would like to mention, is the IPS, our investment policy statement, states that our number one goal is the highest risk-adjusted return. And that is what we're focusing on. We want to get the highest risk-adjusted return. So if you look at, I'm sorry, page 14, I believe. Excuse me. No, I'm sorry, that's page 11. I apologize. So one of the best ways to measure kind of a risk-adjusted return is what's called a Sharpe ratio. And all it is you take the return minus the risk-free rate divided by volatility. So if you're sitting there in layman's terms, if you're just saying you have a 10% return and you have 10% volatility, that's a Sharpe ratio of 1. And the higher the Sharpe, the better. So I just kind of want to highlight the difference, looking over the years, if you see from, May of 10, and you can see that Sharpe ratio is much higher between the 1 and 2. You always want to strive for that, 1 to 2% here. And as you can see, even though that we're doing better than the Sharpe ratio, just the absolute level of a low Sharpe is something that I want to highlight to all of you. That the volatility doesn't mean that the returns are going to be down, but typically the risk-adjusted return, you're going to just see more volatile instrument, movement of the returns. So that's something that I think that you should all be prepared for the next few years. And in fact, I have RVK quantify it. So if you want to move to page 2, this is a very busy chart. It's called a quilt chart. But this just highlights of where we've been and what are we looking to do over the next 10 years? Excuse me. So what really stands out here is on the right-hand side, you could see a 20-year historical, and that's the Sharpe ratio. So all of these things are just our asset classes. And you could see the quilt on the other side, they're just all over the place. And it just shows that a well-diversified portfolio is really positive. But look at the 10-year forecasted Sharpe on the left-hand side, in the middle between the quilt and the longer term. So that's the next 10 years. And if you look at those numbers, our forecasted returns from RVK, who comes through, and Makita does the same, everyone, these CMAs, capital market assumptions, everyone has it, but they're pretty much the same. It just shows that our Sharpe ratios are going to be much lower. So part of this is the last time I'm going to be testifying in front of you. So I'm retiring at the end of the month. And Madam Chair, if I could get a little leeway on this for my last speech, if I could just say a few things of one, gratitude, and something to just be aware of, is just, that the next 10 years are forecasted to be more volatile. I'm not giving an absolute number, what have you. But the other thing I'd just like to mention is when I started, I was the sole person managing 19 billion. Now we have, 10, 11 people managing 31. And the reason for that difference is we've talked about is, performance and everything else. But also the work for this committee. So to get the things done that we needed between hiring people, changing some of the statutes that you talked about to allow us to do these things, it was really, the group between obviously the treasurer who has, major part of this, but also the SLIB and you and the legislature. So I just want to mention that, how important this committee is to the future of the state of Wyoming. Our fund basically is 25 to 30% of the general fund. And if I'm on Craig as well, if you look at the forecasted numbers, mineral income should be going down, volatility is going to come up. The next 10 years, I would argue, are going to be a little bit more interesting. And having all of you here to do this, I just want to say, thank you for everything that you've done in the past, and in the future, I hope that you're able to continue on with what you're doing and allow us to do better. To conclude, if you look at those numbers, I said 8.6, everything else, and when I look at it, it's like, so what? What does that really mean? So one other thing that I would do, and we have a report that comes out, is how do you compare yourself to other funds? So RVK puts forth a sovereign wealth fund comparison of all the other sovereign wealth funds in the United States. And so one of the things that Treasurer Meyer and I, talked about when he first came on is we were bottom quartile in 1, 3, 5, and 10 years compared to the other funds. And so through some of the changes that we've done and through your guidance and help, the most recent one is that we're top quartile in 1, we're number 1 in 3, top quartile in 5, and we've moved from the bottom of 10 to the median because of the most recent returns have moved up, but we're in the right direction. And so it's really important, I think, for all of us to, that big picture of what you're going to look at and how important this committee is and some of the issues that you have going forward. And, I just hope that you continue with what you've been doing. And I just want to say thank you very much for everything that you've done. So with that, I'll stand for any questions.
Senator Guru?
Well, I don't know if I have a question, but I guess a comment. As the treasurer said earlier, no one person has been responsible for really what has been just a tremendous picture that WRS and the investment house on the treasury side has been able to accomplish. It's been a big group effort, starting with the last two treasurers. One of the key moves, though, was to bring on Patrick, and he has helped from the inside and from our side of the house, been able to help articulate a plan that has helped us move forward. We haven't always agreed on how it works and what the end results are, as far as sometimes we like minds can differ about where these monies go, but make no mistake at all. The fact that the money's there is a responsibility of all of us together working towards that goal, and then we fight out how those monies should be spent. And you want to talk about a happy problem, back to the $80 to $30.95 billion over what is an extraordinarily short period of time is nothing short of miraculous and nothing short of really smart, all due to good planning, as the treasurer talks about all the time. And I know we all work on different sides of the street. Sometimes we're the ones who put the sideboards on and try to rein in some of the what are bigger, more expansive ideas that come our way, and some that come from this side forward. But Patrick, working with the office, with the WRS, with everyone else, has been absolutely key and absolutely instrumental to that. And I hope that while he's leaving the role that he's in today, I hope that you don't stray far from us, that we can still count on your wise counsel to help us move forward in whatever capacity we can find. And I want you to let us know personally how much I appreciate it. And I know all of us would agree with that.
Representative Nicholas?
Thank you, Madam Chairman. So I think the fact of the matter is it's going to be damn near impossible to replace you. I mean, you've just done a wonderful job for the state of Wyoming, and all of us owe you a debt of gratitude for what you've done for this state. So thank you very much.
Thank you.
The debt of gratitude goes to the children, the grandchildren, and thereafter because of you. And I know I appreciate you giving us credit because we listen to you, and I do feel proud about that. But it is your talent as a Wyoming native, Cheyenne native, that you have transformed the future of Wyoming. You are irreplaceable. So thank you.
Madam Chair, thank you. But I appreciate your kind words, but everyone's replaceable. And I'm just hoping that with the new person that you can continue on. And two other things you asked before, some questions I just wanted to clarify. When you said other states, I just pulled up to see there are 4 other states that have bills for gold holdings, and also just institutionally, which is across all different states. About 30% of institutions hold gold, and the average holding is 1.7% of their holdings are in gold. And then also Representative Bear, my mental math number coming through, the exact number I just calculated, that 6-odd number over 10 years is actually 6.35, so very close to Polly's numbers that she has in the deck. And that 805, I missed the decimal on that one, it would be 8.5, not 805. For the 70-30 portfolio, if you put the money into the PMTF as opposed to the reserves. And that's just historical numbers, which, as we know, they always say caveat, future returns are no indication for forward returns, and that's very much the case. So thank you.
Madam Chair, can I get a clarification on the gold component? Those are the states that actually hold bullion or invest in gold?
I just did Madam Chair, Representative Nicholas, I just pulled up an AI search or whatever, and I said states, and it was the 4, Utah, Idaho, Tennessee, and Wyoming were the full 4 states, or Texas, that had legislation to purchase gold, and Wyoming was, included in that 4th state.
I think the key distinction there is legislation, right? So it's legislator-driven as opposed to investment professional driven. And I just want to make that distinction.
That is correct, Madam Chair. Thank you all.
All right, let's take a brief break until 3 o'clock. A brief recess right now, till 3. All right, we will bring the meeting back to order. It is 3:02. We are on item number 8, investment performance update, and we are back to the Wyoming Retirement System. Good to see you, Director.
Madam Chairman, members of the committee, thank you very much. We're here to present to the committee an update on the investment performance of the Wyoming Retirement System. It's that $11.5 billion I mentioned early in the morning. As of March 31st, end of the first quarter for 2025, how are we doing? And we're pleased to have today the investment consultants from Makita Investments. Mika Malone is at my right, and shortly I will vacate this seat to Nick Erickson. They also have clients at the University of Wyoming, and they were in Laramie this morning, then traveled here, so they're able to present to the committee in person. But these are the independent consultants that the board engages to help monitor and advise on the investment portfolio. So with that, I will turn it over to Nick and Mika and Sam, and they're going to give this committee an update on our investment performance as of March 31st.
All right, take it away.
All right, thank you, Madam Chair, members of the committee. Sam Masudi, CIO of the Wyoming Retirement System. Turning to page 2, we have a summary of performance here. And overall, our strategy is we don't control markets, so we don't control the overall return. We're trying to beat the benchmark over longer periods. And if we can beat by 50 basis points or 0.5% over time, we're really happy with that result. But in order to beat the benchmark over time, we have to invest differently than the benchmark, make tactical asset allocation tilts, and invest with managers that we hope can outperform. As a result, short term, any quarter or year, or even 2-year period, we could underperform, but that doesn't matter as long as we're outperforming longer term. So right here, we've highlighted the 3, 5, and 7-year returns. Those are good periods, but there's a big enough sample size, but not so long that it reflects the some of the actions and decisions of the previous team. And just kind of walking down, looking at the 5-year return, for instance, we're up 11.66%. Beating the benchmark by 1.34%. So pleased with that result. Then looking at our peer rank, we're in the top 9th percentile. The peer median return was 9.9%, so we're beating that by even more than our benchmark. Beating median peer return by 1.76, and then just showing that our benchmark is not easy to beat. Even our benchmark was about in the top third of the peer set. And looking at our 6.8% actuarial target over the 5 years, we're beating that by 4.86. That's pretty unusual. It's probably more relevant to look at like the 10-year, but we're still beating it pretty considerably. So we're happy with these returns. And then Mika and Nick will give you more detail. Thank you.
Great. Thank you. Good afternoon. Mika Malone, for the record, with Makita Investment Group. And I'll be referring to page numbers in the Makita materials. So I believe if you look at the bottom right, it should say page 6 of 37. Does that match what you have, Sam?
Let's see.
Or is that page 8?
8.
Okay, sorry. So page 8, I'll just adjust my numbering, excuse me. So page 8 should be a page with kind of 4 charts, 2 pie charts on the right-hand side, and then a table on the left-hand side. Okay, sure.
Those displayed?
If you would like them displayed, that's great. If everyone's following along on their personal computers, that's fine as well.
We'll go ahead and put them up. Is that all right? So we're on page 8 of the Makita slide.
Thank you. Then I'll be able to confirm that I'm on the correct slide in my own deck. Thank you. Perfect. So Sam highlighted, I think, some of the long-term performance that has been quite strong for this portfolio. I did want to note, just thinking about the first quarter, several of the drivers of performance in the markets. We had a bit of a transition period where the markets on the equity side were trying to anticipate what a new tariff regime might look like and a new trade situation would look like. So you had US equity markets in relatively negative territory in the first quarter, where thinking back to 2024, they were the largest driver of return. You also saw within that some of the more defensive sectors performing better. So we kind of think about what drove performance in the period. Investments in stocks outside of the US were big drivers of outperformance. The dollar weakened during the first quarter, so investments in developed markets internationally, investments in emerging markets also helped to drive positive performance in this rather short period of US market weakness. Also, given some of the uncertainty in the markets, the bond market actually performed quite well. So you see positive results from kind of core bonds and other bond market investments in this and other portfolios. So when we just think about the quarter, this portfolio was up about 30 basis points. You see that on the left-hand side of the page in either the bar chart or the table at the bottom. And that outperformed the benchmark by about 10 basis points during the period and was right in line with the universe median. So Sam showed over long periods, this fund has pretty significantly and meaningfully outperformed its peer group for this 1 quarter period, kind of in line with that group. Largely what you might expect in a period of transition when different drivers were contributing to returns. And as Sam mentioned, there are several areas of this portfolio where the staff has executed investments somewhat outside the target. So they've been able to allocate slightly more or slightly less to certain of these categories. So for example, you were overweight or you were underweight marketable equities during the period and slightly underweight a couple of other areas of the portfolio, including private equity and marketable fixed income. So when we think about the drivers, we'll look in a moment, you'll see how public equity contributed to those returns. If we move forward 2 pages, which should be page 10, I believe, it should be the 1-year asset class attribution summary. We try to take a look over several periods, and so today I'll just go over the 1-year and the 5-year as kind of 2, I think, useful data points to show what's contributing to the returns of this portfolio. And we really look at 2 main things on these charts. The bars show you whether the fund at the total level at the top of the table is out or underperforming its benchmark. So for the 1-year period, you see underperformance from the portfolio. And then within the blue and green, you see if that's from selection within the asset classes. So did managers do better or worse than their benchmarks? And the green line shows where you allocated more or less to those asset classes and did that drive performance. So over the 1-year period, which I'd argue is a relatively short time period, you see that really selection within marketable alternatives, so the hedge fund portfolio here, underperformed in this period. The hedge fund portfolio and the marketable alternatives for WRS have been a significant driver of outperformance across almost all other time periods that we see, but just wanted to highlight what drove the performance in that 1-year period. And if you just flip forward 2 more slides for me to the 5-year attribution, this will be page 12. You see the reverse of that story. So you see that the selection effect is driving the majority of the returns within the WRS portfolio, which means staff's ability to select managers across asset categories is what's driving the outperformance. And you see relatively consistent outperformance across all of these asset categories on this page, with a couple very small exceptions, which are marketable equity. You see slight negative attribution. A lot of that comes from just being a little underweight to public equities when public equities have done very well. Your overall portfolio was able to make up for that through very good selection in marketable alternatives and private markets. And then you also see your cash position being a slight drag over the 5-year period. Also probably not a huge surprise in an environment where we saw double-digit returns from equity markets. I did want to note that over the quarter and the year, because I heard it was a topic this morning and it was mentioned during Patrick Fleming's testimony, gold has been an outstanding contributor to performance where it's been held in different investment portfolios of late. So within the WRS portfolio, gold currently is just under 2%, I think, of total portfolio assets. It was the strongest performer in the most recent quarter, in the first quarter up a little over 9%, and over the trailing year up 40%. So very strongly additive, even at a very small proportion of overall portfolio assets. If we go forward 2 more pages, I'll conclude my remarks on the risk slide that we show. And like Mr. Fleming noted earlier, looking at the portfolio, not just what returns have been able to be generated, but to ensure that those returns are generated without taking on undue risk, I think is a core part of Sam's work. It's a core part of Makita's work in evaluating the success of this portfolio over time. So we show these risk statistics across 1, 2, 3, 5, and 10 years. We could show 7, but I don't think you'd be able to read it because the font would get quite small. So we try to show as many periods as we can on one page. And we look at a variety of factors, but I might just highlight on the left-hand side of the page 2 that we look to on a regular basis. The first, those are the return numbers of your portfolio, your benchmark, and the public fund median on the left. You see that in every period except for the 1 year, your portfolio is well ahead of both your benchmark and the peer median. And then that next column over, excuse me, is the annualized standard deviation. This is showing you how much your portfolio is moving away from that benchmark that's utilized. And what you see is that your standard deviation has been pretty closely aligned with the portfolio over time. So it is taking what I'd consider an average amount of risk relative to your portfolio benchmark. You can also see that your standard deviation is lower than the peer median in every time period shown, which has resulted in, and I think that Mr. Fleming noted Sharpe ratios as another useful metric. This has resulted in positive Sharpe ratios for your portfolio across every time period. So to me, this is kind of the proof statement that, okay, we know we have good performance. Let's make sure we're getting there in a reasonable way. And this is the page that I turn to for that. So happy to answer any questions. Otherwise, I'll conclude my comments there.
All right, thank you, Ms. Malone. Any questions? Representative Harrelson?
Thank you, Madam Chairwoman. Just, and this is new guy coming in and just wanting to get some clarification. Obviously, across the board throughout the entire nation, we're seeing accounts that are not performing to an extent that is sustainable long-term. And so, and I looked at this and I think I have a pretty good idea, but can you just give me that 30,000 foot view as we're looking at possibly, as we heard from Mr. Fleming, a more volatile market coming up over the next 10 years? Are we at a point where you guys feel comfortable with our funding model and how we're structuring across the board our retirement plans? And if we feel like we are going to be able to see a performance base that's going to be able to fund itself long-term?
I'll make a comment to begin. Thank you for the question. I do think that it is a more uncertain environment going forward in terms of whether you'll be able to see the level of outperformance you've seen in this fund and maybe some others. One thing to keep in mind that I think is a positive is when we look at the contribution from fixed income within your portfolio today relative to, say, 3 years ago in a slightly higher rate environment. That's obviously a challenge in other areas of the markets. But for a pension fund, that additional yield helps your portfolio get closer to your actuarial assumed rate of return of 6.9%, right? So if you can earn 4 or 5 or 6% from fixed income without taking on a ton of risk, I'd say that's a nice offset. The investment committee for the WRS and the board annually take a look at the asset allocation to make sure that we're still getting the right mix of investments going forward to set the bar for Sam and his team to execute on. And I think that actually looking forward 10 and 20 years, which is the time frame that Makita looks at and others look at for capital market expectations, it's a reasonably optimistic picture that you should be able to get to that actuarial assumed rate. Not without some periods of volatility. I expect that we will see them, but I do think that there is reason to be optimistic that you can get there through good investments and good portfolio management.
Thank you, Madam Chairwoman. Thank you for that. And I agree. Obviously, it's like a crystal ball. What do we really know what the market's going to do? Absolutely not. It could be phenomenal or it could tank, and we've seen that over the last. I mean, when you got S&P 500 that hasn't performed over anyways, doesn't matter. Point is, that's a concern. The next question I have, and this is kind of a crazy out there, not something like let's take action, but just more have the conversation. My dad's generation 401k was the answer, and a pension plan was the answer. Well, for our generation, my generation, we're seeing less and less of a pension plan concept and more of like an IRA. Where's the point where are we going to continue to ride a pension plan horse into the sunset for the next generation of investors? And is that the answer as we see the next generation coming into the state and working with the state? Are we going to continue to do a pension plan, or are we going to look at more like an IRA designed option where we are helping them fund that through their retirement? And I know I see you already squirming. But I don't know, it's just an idea as I'm looking at it. And where's the point where as these markets continue to shift, as technology continues to change, you talk to my generation and the generation below me and you say pension plan and they look at you like, why in the heck would I want a pension plan? And so these are the concerns that I have coming forward. So could you speak into that?
Mr. Busati?
Yeah, Madam Chair, Representative Haroldson. Yes, this is a policy issue that's probably more at a board level or legislative level. I think that for any change, there's some type of opposite reaction. I think certainly in the public sector, with a lot of the policemen and firemen, for instance, as they're considering job opportunities, the public pensions are a pretty big factor there. And so the states that have converted from not having public pensions have been in a little bit of a disadvantage, and some of them have been looking at switching back just because if they don't have the public pension, they have to provide more in cash compensation, stay competitive. So there are some of the issues. I think Dave probably has a lot more to say on this topic.
Director?
Madam Chairman, Representative Haroldson, I'd say this. In the private sector, companies are less stable compared to governments, and they have traditionally recruited a workforce that is a little more mobile, and they have the ability to compensate their workforce in ways that government does not. I've been a public employee for 47 years. No one has ever given me a stock option. No one has ever given me a bonus. So the private sector has the ability to structure compensation differently. And in the face of accounting rules that were adopted by the federal government, private pensions were private, but they were insured by the federal government, the Pension Guarantee Association. And they had a series of bad actors where companies reneged on their pension obligations and put it on the insurance fund. That caused insurance premiums to skyrocket, and the federal government instituted accounting rules that forced companies to fully fund their pensions, and if they had a bad year in the stock market and the pension was no longer fully funded, they immediately had to put more money in. They didn't allow for a multi-year buildup to that. That became a little hard for the chief financial officers of corporations. It became a little harder to do, and I think the labor market was such that corporations were able to end public pensions for many of their employees and go to a 401k model, as you noted. Whether it's a good pension or not is not the position of the Wyoming retirement system. WRS will administer whatever pension program authorized by this legislature. Whether some people think it's a good one or a bad one or in between is not a concern. It will be a concern for the workforce and for your HR people across all the public entities. And I would remind this body, when we make decisions on the pension plan, in the public employee plan and the law enforcement plan, these plans are 80% local. So you're making decisions on behalf of cities, towns, counties, school districts, and your colleges. The difference between the two types of plans really is one is not better than the other. They are just different. In my personal opinion, they work better together. But the main thing is that retirement is expensive no matter how you fund it, whether it's with an IRA or with a pension. And there are risks involved. This is an odd industry I found myself in, where living longer is a problem. We call it a longevity risk. The other thing that always strikes me as odd, just off the cuff, Madam Chairman, is that when you see all these commercials on TV telling you how to retire or whatever, none of these folks have ever done it. They're still working for a living. That's why they're giving you these ads. And most of the folks that are even in retirement can't tell you how it went all the way through retirement. So it's an interesting situation. Retirees, no matter how you fund it, there are certain risks. There is investment risk. You have to invest an adequate amount of money, and you have to invest it positively and earn a return. There is sequence of return risk. Even if your average return is okay, if you happen to retire, in the first year, your savings is down by 30% because it's the great financial crisis, then next year's withdrawals from that now are eating into your seed corn and your outcome in your situation is markedly different than folks that retired either 5 years earlier or 5 years later. It's a sequence of return risk. And then, of course, you have the unanswered question that none of us can answer, is how long are we going to live? It's called longevity risk. Yes, living longer is a risk in retirement. The way a pension works is we manage those risks. You can either manage those risks at the individual level and put it on the individual to invest enough and to invest it properly and decide how to withdraw it and hope that the sequential return is okay for that particular retiree, because unfortunately, we only live one life. And so you only get one chance at this. And then how long are you going to live? It's if you take out too much, then you're penniless at age 85. If you have money left on the table, well, maybe you had a more frugal retirement than you needed to, and maybe you can leave this money to your heirs, but that may not have been your intent. It was for your retirement. Public pensions manage this in a pooled way. We have professional management to manage the money. We have an actuarial return target of 6.8%. We manage the sequential return risk by pooling the assets. It didn't matter that our fund went down 30% in 2009, which it did. Pure fund only went down 26%. That goes back to the stuff we talked about this morning. We work our way through that. Longevity risk is pooled. We don't know how long any individual is going to live either. But for a large group, yes, we know exactly what the average is going to be pretty precisely. And we monitor that over time. So it's a pooled insurance risk. Some people will live shorter lives, some people will live longer, but it's a guaranteed income for the rest of their life. These programs are actually best managed as a component of retirement. The board's philosophy is that a secure financial retirement for public employees consists of a core benefit of Social Security, then a defined benefit pension, supplemented by supplemental savings in a 457 or a 401k type arrangement. And so if you were to change that, again, it's just as Sam said, it's a policy choice, but there's one thing that this committee needs to understand. Right now, we do have a unfunded liability in the large public pension plan. Judges is 100%, Fire B is 100%, but the other plans have still unfunded liabilities, meaning that the present value of our liabilities, all these liabilities that we forecast, all the payments we're going to have, we discount them back to present value, and we compare that to the assets we have on hand. The Public Retirement Fund today, or as of 1 January, is rated at 79.75%, call it 80%. That's a good number, but it still means we're about $2.5 billion short of the money we would like to have in the bank to get to 100%. You want to be at 100% for a couple reasons. One is to reduce your risk. What happens if the markets go down? If you're 100%, you don't go down as far. It's easier to recover. And you don't have to eat into your seed corn, which really turns into a problem. And the other thing is, it's just more efficient. A fund with $100 in it, when the markets are up 10%, you'll earn $10. If you only have $80 in it, you'll earn $8. If you want to fund the pension most efficiently with fewer taxpayer dollars and more investment dollars, you want to have a larger corpus. We're going to get to 100% with the help of this committee and the legislature. 2 years ago, or on the last session, not this past session, but 2 sessions ago, this legislature adjusted the contribution rates to reduce the risk going forward in several of the plans. If you don't have adequate contribution rates, don't have the recommended contribution rates as analyzed by the actuaries, then you're accepting more risk on the investment portfolio because contributions come in and that's steady income. In the public employee plan, we're going to get from 80% to 100% over the course of about 20 years, and we're doing that by charging a contribution rate for all the current employees that's larger than what their benefit requires. There's an amortization component. So we're paying in a little bit more. So we're going to recover that unfunded liability to make up for years of bad investment performance and inadequate contributions by having higher contributions today. And so that's how we're going to get to 100%. If you were to interrupt that today and say all new employees are going to go into a 401k, that means every new employee is not contributing to the system, they're not making an amortization component, and it is left to the existing folks. You can think of all of yourselves as a rowboat, and we're all rowing together to the promised land. But now the new employees are not going to join our canoe, and people will retire, and the population will rapidly go down. We know that in the public employee plan, when we had a differentiation between Tier 1 and Tier 2 in 2012, that by 2020, just 8 years later, 50% of the population was now Tier 2. Or in my canoe example, 50% of the seats are now vacant. So there's actually a fairly large turnover in the public arena, and you will wind up with not enough horsepower to get to the promised land. So if the legislature were to go to a 401k system someday, there must be a plan to achieve full funding for the existing promises that we've made. And that's a significant obstacle to making that change. The other obstacle is, well, now what are you going to do on employee compensation, and how are you going to man the force? There are instances where states have tried to go there. Some have been successful with it. I don't think Oklahoma has any big problems. Alaska does. They have found themselves, there's almost a story in the pension industry of the merry-go-round for teachers. They will go to Alaska. They have a 401k arrangement. They have to serve 5 years to get vested with all the matching. Immediately after 5 years, they go back to Washington State where they can earn a pension. And so as a result, the public education force in Alaska has this continual turnover, and they can't keep experienced teachers, and it's degraded the quality of the education. And they have the same problem with the state troopers. The final thing is, if you were to put all of these risks that I talked about, and you put that on the individual, well, there are ways to do that. But most people are not really Goldman Sachs finance analysts, but instinctively, even the third grade teacher kind of knows that they ought to be compensated for this additional risk. And in most of the schemes I've seen, people want to put less money into it, where reality is to compensate for the risk, they should put more money into it. Put in a more simple way, if you want to change my pension and make it into a 401k, if you put enough money into it, well, all righty. But you have to do that. Otherwise, it's not going to be an effective component of total compensation. Or you've got to change other things on total compensation, which you can do. You can just pay them more, increase wages. You could pay more on their medical, or make it up for benefits in other ways. And the best way to do that's a total conversation that needs to be had with the people that manage your personnel in the state. So that means the people at the table to really discuss that are the folks from ANI, HRD, and all of our school business officials, all the people that do hiring out in the public arena in the state.
Thank you, Director. No 401k. All right. Senator Guru?
Chair. Thank you. Thanks to Makita for all this information. Dave, I do have a question for you, Director. Let's say we're staying static where we are right now, moving forward. Is there somewhere you can point me where the little pie charts or the little graph that you like to show us about on the road to actuarial soundness, Plan A will be, if we go at the way we're going right now, in 23 years, we'll be at 100%. Do we have that little chart for each one of our funds based on today? Is it somewhere that I'm missing there? Is it in my packet?
It's not
somewhere?
included in your packet, but I can email it to this committee. We got the finalized reports here this last week. I was telling Don Richards I'm going to barrage him tomorrow with a bunch of emails because we have all the final reports in.
Perfect. Okay. Follow up? Just one follow-up too. And this is a question that came from a constituent, and I just want to, well, it's a larger question that I know the answer to, but in the last 5 years, how many years have we done a 13th check?
I'm sorry, I didn't quite hear the question.
The
13th check, the extra, we don't give
COLA.
COLAs, we don't give bonuses, but every once in a while, we do a 13th check. In the last 5 years, how many times have we done that?
Madam Chairman, Senator Guru, we've never done that in the last 5 years.
You haven't done it in the last 5?
We've not paid any post-retirement increase, either in the form of a increased percentage or as a 13th check, since 2008.
Okay, thank you.
And you had to be retired for 2 years in order to get it. The law at that time said that the retirement board shall, the word was shall in the statute, award a COLA if it was less than 3%, couldn't do more than 3%. It had to be less than the CPI, couldn't be more than the Consumer Price Index. And it had to be actuarially neutral to the fund in what was called a break-even COLA amount. The last time the actuaries were able to say that there was a break-even amount available was in 2008. That was just before the great financial crisis hit. And they awarded a COLA of 1.03%. They did not award a COLA in 2009. They did not award a COLA in 2010. And they did not award a COLA in 2011. And in 2012, the legislature changed the law to take that away from the board and frankly put the responsibility back on the legislature. I think that was part of the intent, was that the legislature would take on the issue there. And that was involved by saying that we would not award a COLA. The board cannot recommend a COLA until the fund is 100% plus an allowance to pay for the COLA. Typically, any useful COLA will typically take about 2% of fund balance, so you need to be about 102, plus an allowance for market fluctuation, which will vary a little bit by the fund, but it's going to be at least 10%. Think of a 10% reduction or a 10% kind of recession in the stock market, which is pretty normal. You're going to need to get to about 112% or something like that before a fund can offer a COLA. We do have 2 funds today that have now met the first requirement, and that is the Judicial Plan and the Fire B. And we will work on formalizing what that allowance for a market fluctuation is in consultation with Makita. That'll make some recommendations, but it'll be on the order of that magnitude.
All right. Thank you so much. Appreciate your time. All right, with that, committee, it's time for our 3 o'clock agenda item, number 9, the Generational Fund. Treasurer Meyer. And we have LSO staff to walk us through briefly, if one of you is prepared, Senate File 197.
Yep, Madam Chairman, very quickly, 9-01 is the engrossed version, 9-02 is the introduced version. This bill would have created the Wyoming Generational Investment Account and would have specified the conditions for investing funds in the account, the distribution of investment earnings, and requirements for transferring funds annually into the account. This account would have been set up to where the 70-30 mix that's specified in statute in 94716E would not have applied. Instead, the investment for this would have been invested so the risk portfolio doesn't materially exceed the risk portfolio or risk profile of a risk portfolio that consists of 85% private equity and 15% private credit investments. The bill would have required an annual transfer for 30 years from 2026 to 2056 made from the LSRA to the generational account. This is where the 2 versions diverge. The introduced version would have just been $100 million from the LSRA every year. The engrossed version would have provided for a graduated transfer depending on the balance of the LSRA. So, for example, if the LSRA balance was less than $1 billion, no transfer would have been made for that year. Then on July 1st of the fiscal year, after 30 years after the first deposit to the account, 37.5% of the investment earnings in the account attributable to the annual transfer would be deposited in the general fund. The remaining earnings would stay in that generational account. Madam Chairman, that's a pretty brief overview of the bill. Happy to answer questions.
Questions for Mr. Fuller? All right, seeing none. Treasurer?
Madam Chairman, I'd like to make a recommendation is that we actually have a resolution or a constitutional amendment. And as to the topic of what the asset allocation number should be, that they be a separate bill. Because the asset allocations, you want to be able to change those statutorily and not constitutionally. That shouldn't be in the Constitution. But if you're going to actually have a non-violent fund and it permanent, then the best place to do it is in the Constitution. And that's what I would ask us to jump off from that understanding, that you actually have a two-prong approach, one for asset allocation that should be statutorily, and then one for a permanent fund, which essentially should be permanent, the same way the permanent mineral trust fund is.
Thank you, Treasurer. Representative Nicholas? I see the thought bubble there.
So I'm just curious, what would the constitutional change essentially say?
Well, I'm glad that you asked that question, Mr. Representative Nicholas. I've been working a little bit with the chairman, and what I think the first thing that we do is that we no longer call it the generational fund, because essentially there was some work last year that was not by this committee, but was by some other individuals that put the name generational fund on a work product that was probably a lot farther away from what the committee had. And so I want to actually kind of look at it, and I've talked to Senator Nethercott about the concept of actually naming it about the same way and let you guys take ownership on it, essentially. We had the Permanent Mineral Trust Fund, and it's a PMTF, that actually names what happens in the Constitution. And I see the principles of this particular fund is that one, that it's permanent, one, that it uses, I think, the most efficient mechanism for getting the highest return on a risk-adjusted basis, and that's using basically a compounding investment mechanism. And other that it provides a long-term revenue after a set period of time. And so in those areas, Mr. Chairman, I think talking to the senator, there's a couple of things that we could look at. One, and I'd go ahead and let Senator Nethercott, look at the couple of things that we looked at. I think one was SURI and one was CIPRA.
Let me read it to you. It has been provided to me in pleasant font size. Just want to take note of that. It's a good start. Article 22, State Investments. Compounding Investment Permanent Revenue Account is the name. There is created a Compounding Investment Permanent Revenue Account. The legislature shall enable the Office of the State Treasurer, through professional accounting, investment, management, and distribution, a continuous compounding investment permanent revenue account. The legislature shall annually appropriate an amount to the account in consultation with the Investment Funds Committee. The amount determined to be necessary will consider the amount of earnings to generate replacement of lost mineral revenue, fund infrastructure, education, other fixed governmental expenses, inflation, freezing and reducing taxes as determined by the legislature. The appropriations shall cease after 30 years. The account shall reach maturity after 30 years. In each year after the account reaches maturity, the state treasurer shall begin distributions, as provided by law, 37.5% of the compounded earnings representing each annual contribution. The remaining 62.5% shall be reinvested by the state treasurer and managed and distributed in the same perpetual manner as the original appropriations of the account.
So thank you, Madam Chairman. I think, the areas that are in there, we wanted to put some, first of all, I think bring in the the Investment Funds Committee in a way that they haven't been brought into the process before. Well, actually, in a couple of ways. One, they're in the Constitution, so that it'll be a fixed entity. And two, is that they will be advising the legislators in the legislature, where prior to this, they just advise the Treasurer's Office and the State Loan and Investment Board. And so we increase their participation as, I guess, an advisory committee. From my perspective, I think that's a more resilient mechanism to give a more consistent outcome by a group of investment professionals that understand compounding interest and compounding returns, and understand the amount of money that would have to go in to the process to get the desired results out. Now, this is I'm not sure if this is the right list for them to consider with the legislature, and that's where the policy comes in. I think I chose these necessarily that we've and I think the Senator Nethercott has a good chart that shows that the nominal amount of mineral revenue is about the same over the past decade or so, relatively. But the earnings power that represented by the same amount of money in one decade versus a decade later, that has gone down. So in coal revenues themselves, we've lost about $500 to $600 million between coal bed bonuses and the loss of over 200 million tons of coal production a year. So that's one thing that I wanted to try to replace to keep up necessarily with the cost of government in the future. The other thing is that we've seen in this last year, infrastructure, especially in water, that's a huge thing. When I was on Select Water, 10 years ago, it was right at $1 billion of concrete that was going to be aging out, that's going to have to be replaced. And so we saw it with the La Perelle. And then looking at the cost of construction on highways, we know that pavement has gone up, the cost of paving has gone up. Concrete has gone to $250 a ton, a yard, from probably 80, 85. And that was because basically the demand for all the data centers. So basically construction costs have been really skyrocketing. We know that we're going to have to replace school capacity because the schools are going to be aging out in a decade in the future. Looking at those things like that, other education, there's that reoccurring increase. And then I said other fixed governmental expenses, because I wanted to kind of put sideboards on this so that when you look at it, you're not looking at growing government. You're wanting to make sure that the expenses that you contemplate are essentially fixed. So you're trying to say to somebody that says, well, we know that government has to grow by 10% a year or 4% a year or whatever it might be, that you're really looking at really fixed expenses. And you guys define those, what a fixed governmental expense is, to kind of keep your hands on it. And then inflation, because inflation, we know that's a huge thing in the last few years. And it's, as Patrick, I think, said, it's average about 2.6%. Then essentially, I think that a lot of the goals that I have and other folks have, excuse me, Madam Chairman, is freezing and reducing taxes. And so those are two things that I think that at the end of the game would be a laudable goal for basically the most efficient way to invest. The 30 years. I'll talk about a little bit about the time period. We use the 30 years because essentially the $100 million will return somewhere around 1.744 million in 30 years at 10%. Now, we've been clicking along around 12.5% on asset allocation that's contemplated about an 85-15. So we really only need about 24 and a half years on that. But the capital market assumptions that you heard, that those things are going to be a little dicey. They're along the lines, rather than 10 or 11%, they're more around 9 or 10% for those asset allocations coming up in the next year. So that gives you a little bit of room to make sure that you're going to have enough money going forward. The 37.5%, it's not necessarily an arbitrary number, because what I wanted to do is come up with a number, a percentage, that if you wanted to leave enough in after that you would actually be able to make sure that you outpaced the growth of government and the growth of expenses going forward. And this would definitely do it at that rate. Now, we can have some different conversations about that, whether it should be 60-40. I would say in no circumstances could I see going past a 50-50 to actually be able to reach those goals. So the reason I think that we should do this today, because it's the same thing about, this is kind of like a college fund. If you get started early, you know your kid's going to go to a great school. If you don't, it's not going to happen. If we get started early, we know that we're going to have an opportunity to actually make money with our money. And essentially, I think this is really the right time to get it done, because there's, from my perspective, there's no time than the present to actually institute the most efficient way that we can make money. Now, we've had I guess, an evolution. We went from straight bonds, and then in the 90s, we went to 50-50 bonds, and then we went to 70-30, and then we went to a reference portfolio. This is the next step in the evolution about the efficiency of investing. And that's pretty much where we're at. I can certainly, Madam Chairman, I have other copies here if you want me to have them passed out so people can look at those. And
Yes, Treasurer, let's pass them out.
Yep.
As a reminder, it's quite pleasing font size. So is there any questions for the treasurer as we're passing those out?
Yes.
Formula Senator Guru?
Thank you, Madam Chair. So, Mr. Treasurer, I want to make sure I understand what you're saying. You're asking us to contemplate this constitutional amendment along with one of the two versions of the legislation to work hand in hand as we go forward. Is that right, or do I have it?
I think part of the other version, which
Okay.
is, that's the 85-15, which needs a 2/3 vote.
Okay.
So they both need 2/3 vote, but I don't want to put the asset allocation, in the constitutional amendment, because,
Right.
yeah, that's something that.
That's something for the
fluid.
And that's,
Could I have
so-
those? Thank you.
so the constitutional amendment is the main, and then the belt and suspenders, if you will, then would be the legislation that contemplates ferreting out the amounts and all
Yeah.
that, correct?
Right. And if I can talk a little bit about what happened in the Senate last year as far as having a variable amount of money that would be going into the fund. The problem with having a variable amount of money, and I'll use the use case of actually reducing taxes. And let's say as an example, you want to have $100 million that you want to put into a tax reduction program. But you got to have that $100 million every year from the standpoint, if it's for business, or even if it's for people that are expecting, a reasonable amount that they can budget that they're not going to pay. But if you have something that you're 10 million one year and you're 100 million the next year, and then you're 50 million back, and you're trying to do an incentive program for the coal industry or the oil industry, where you're taking part of the severance tax and you're substituting the revenue off of this, then essentially, how are they going to budget if they're paying less taxes one year or more taxes the next year, rather than having, a steady program? And whether it's for industry or whether it's for the person on the street, you want to try to get it to where it's consistent, so they can budget consistently, in those areas. And that's one use case that I see where you need to have a reasonable amount of money coming in. Now, you're going to have probably some variability in this with the IFC. But what you will have with the IFC is that they'll be able to put forth, I would say, a scenario where you're going to be able to have probably less variability than if it's just left up to what's left at the end of the day. It's kind of like, I guess it's kind of like feeding your dog with table scraps. One night he's going to eat like a king, and the next week he may be wandering over to the neighbors. So that's maybe not a great analogy. But coming from an old farm and ranch background, when I saw some of my neighbors having the neighbors' dogs eating out of our dog's bowl, we kind of found out how they were doing it.
Any additional questions from the treasurer? So committee, here's your options right now, is we would
Yes.
need a motion if you want to move this forward, the proposed constitutional amendment, but with the language presented in front of you. It doesn't mean that would be the final iteration, excuse me.
No, this is a draft. It's just a jumping off point.
Just a draft for further discussion for your next agenda item, this topic, with the bill draft for the committee's review. So if you're interested in moving that forward, I would need a motion to do so. Senator Crum has moved it. Is there a second? Seconded by Representative Haroldson. Further discussion. Representative Nicholas?
So the idea of a constitutional amendment, to me, is really different than creating and just making the account. If we do a constitutional amendment, if we want to pursue a constitutional amendment, I think we need to be very careful about the wordsmithing, and this doesn't do it. And it's way too specific, and it's also too directive. It's got absolute numbers, and it's dictating that the legislature shall determine essentially what the lost income is going to be in minerals for replacement of, for infrastructure, education, government expenses, inflation, freezing. Well, that could be half our budget if you do the math. This language, to me, doesn't make any sense. So if we do a constitutional amendment, I would suggest that we rewrite this and make it a very general discussion that says it's in the best interest of the state of Wyoming to use some of our mineral wealth to help fund future generations and just put it in the Constitution. But to put these kind of guidelines on it, I just think you're tying the hands of the way this thing is worded. You really are, of future generations and future legislators, because you can't really fix it without another new constitutional amendment.
One thing I would refer the committee to is our materials provided to us this morning from that dense packet on the Wyoming law on investments, and there's references to other constitutional amendments
I can't
concerning our
hear you.
investments. This morning, you received a packet. I think Ian provided the overview of the constitutional provisions concerning investments. And so that serves as a guide of what we currently have in our Constitution regarding investments. So as we have this discussion on this motion, I'd encourage you just to reference that to see how we've done it historically versus this one here today. Senator Crum?
Madam Chairman, my motion is, let's explore this conceptually. Let's ask LSO to come up with the draft language. It's certainly not a motion to approve what was in front of us today. It's a conceptual motion to move down this road and come up with a draft that then we can debate at our next meeting.
And I just might add, Madam Chair, that probably the most important issue we have coming in front of us is funding of education more than the general fund or anything else. And so that's probably where we ought to focus on, because it's just more critical at this point in time, if, for a specific bill.
Well, Madam Chairman.
Treasurer?
I think I'd support the conceptual motion, and one of the things that I would say that if you want to look at it, kind of do some of those analysis yourself as far as what do you want to, what support do you think the budget's going to need in 30 years? And that's the first thing. Essentially, at $100 million and these ratios, you would essentially get somewhere between $600 and $700 million, which would take the coal loss revenues and basically replace all of those. And it would leave approximately $1 billion left in the next cycle. And then after 30 years after that, you would essentially have somewhere in the range of $6 billion that would be available, 60 years from today. And so I'm looking at, how much money do you actually have to have? And the easy way to look at that is that for you guys between now and the next time we have the discussions on where we need to start on these things is there's an app and essentially go to just type in compounding interest calculation and then put NerdWallet. And that'll actually get you on the best compounding interest calculator that I think is out there. And you can put in the money that you want. You can put in the time period you want. You can put the interest rate in, compounded annually. And that'll give you some different numbers that you can look at to when you have the answer to what you think we're going to need to make sure that we don't have to raise taxes or get rid of taxes in the future. So.
Senator Grew?
Thank you, Madam Chairman. When we introduced this subject last year on the floor, I said it was the most important piece of legislation that we'll take up. And I believe in it, and I still do. And I'm willing to vote for this motion today in concept, but with a cautionary note. And I think the Treasurer's Office needs to think about this one long and hard between this meeting and the next meeting. We didn't pass that bill. It didn't escape my notice that we didn't pass the bill.
Yeah.
So we have to pass the bill, and we have to show the people of the state that it works. What you're asking us to do is to memorialize it in the Constitution, pass the bill, and prove it to the folks that it works, all in one bite. That's a tall can of corn, Mr. Treasurer. And I like the way you swing, but I just don't know if that's something that we can all do in one bite. And I would submit that maybe that if we actually passed a bill, made it work, and then came out, I understand that's slower, and I know what we're trying to do in compounding and how important it is. I said it was the most important thing that I think that's come up in this realm. And I'm willing to vote yes to look at a draft, but just between now and the next meeting, I really want to think about it, because if we shoot too high and lose, what do we got? Nothing. So I'm saying, and I'm not looking for an answer right now. I'm just, for the committee's sake, because I want to hear from everyone that, how are we going to move forward with this all in that one bite, all together? Because it's going to take everybody working on this one together to convince our floors and then the voters.
Yeah.
Well, and then getting it past the governor's desk would be one other little hurdle that we're going to have to climb.
Well, Madam Chairman,
That's a different story.
I'm not so
Treasurer?
worried about the Senate, but I am worried about the House, and I think the folks that, because the two big things that you have here, I would say split it apart, whether you go with the statute or not, because what stopped us, I think we could have got the votes on the majority vote for the statute, but not the majority vote, that the 2/3 that we need, except for the asset allocation. And that's the one that's the hard one to do. And you could implement this even with the 70-30, but it would be not nearly as effective, because you'd be throwing away 30% of your returns.
All right, there's a motion and a second for a bill draft for a constitutional amendment based on what was provided to us, with the caveat that it's conceptual. So, best of luck, LSO. So actually, what I anticipate is that motion for or that constitutional bill draft will look very similar to what was provided to us, just so that you understand. And we know what we're talking about when we get the bill draft to work. That doesn't mean we're adopting a bill draft. We'll have to work the draft, but that will be how it'll be presented in the event you vote for that. So I'm going to call the question on the topic now in light of the hour. All those in favor of Senator Crum's motion to draft a constitutional amendment based on this compounding investment permanent revenue account, please say aye. Aye. Any opposed? All right, that motion has passed. Secondly, is there a motion for a statutory bill based on last year's bill, as opposed to a constitutional amendment? Now would be the time to bring that motion.
So moved.
Moved by Senator Guru. And which version of that bill draft are you proposing for LSO's understanding?
Graduated.
The graduated. Is there a second?
I'll second for discussion.
Seconded for discussion by Representative Nicholas. Further discussion?
Madam Chair, the problem that I have with this bill, the bills that we have, is that basically it's mandatory. There'll be a time when we might have $300 million in extra dollars where we can do it. There will be years that when we don't have a penny. We won't have $100 million. In fact, we'll be using the LSRA probably to balance the budget if we have a recession, depending on what's happened. I've been through it twice so far. So I think the contribution to the generational fund should be basically voluntary, based upon, and every legislature that meets has the opportunity to contribute to it. But the idea to say we're automatically going to kick in $100 million every year, I just don't think that's realistic. And once again, it'll require a statutory change to undo it, but why would we tie the hands of the future legislature? It's creating the fund and funding it, and out of the gate, we could probably put $300 or $400 million in an education fund. And we probably should do that and to speed up the compounding. But that doesn't mean we can do it every year. And so I would suggest that the draft basically we don't need to put an amount in it. We just need to create the account and then fund it as part of the bill.
Senator Guru, do you find that friendly?
I do.
He does, and you're the second. So that is the motion. Further discussion on the
Madam
motion?
Chairman,
Treasurer?
I would say the reason you would do it for the same reason we did it when we had $80 in the bank and we said we're going to put 1.5% of anything that came in on minerals into a permanent mineral trust fund. And what this does is that you have the efficiency of compounding, which is going to essentially, that compounds at an exponential rate. Your earnings compound at an exponential rate rather than an arithmetic rate that's about 1% over what you're actually getting. And so the reason that you do this is that you're looking at the efficiency of investing that essentially is 16 times the efficiency of the permanent mineral trust fund. And those are numbers that I don't believe that we should ignore. And whether it's 100 million or whether it's 50 million, or whether it's a percentage of a 0.5% of the severance tax, we should have a continued, basically an annual contribution. So you don't have an annual contribution, 33 years from now, if we have a bad year and we don't put anything in it, who's to say that the legislatures 33 years from now are going to look at it and look back at us and say we didn't have the courage to go forward?
Further discussion on Senator Guru's motion? All those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed, say no. That motion has passed. It'll be on the agenda at our next meeting.
All right.
All right, with that, we are moving on to our last agenda item for the day, which is a heavy lift, I think, concerning item number 10, gaming revenues. We are going to hear from our exceptional LSO fiscal staff giving us an overview. All right, welcome, Ms. Vaughn.
Thank you. Madam Chairman, members of the committee, Karen Vaughn, LSO, and I actually think I'm more nervous to testify in front of this committee than I was on Monday when I did a similar testimony. Don't know why. But I'm here to provide you some information on the historic revenues from gaming and compare those to other states. I'm going to cover 4 revenue streams: the lottery, pari-mutuel wagering, skill-based amusement games, and online sports wagering. The lottery, the first, was authorized in 2013. Upon passage, local governments were entitled to the first $6 million of net revenues, with the balance going to the school foundation program. The lottery didn't turn revenue until 2015, and that's when local governments started receiving revenues. 2019, the first time it would have probably exceeded the $6 million, and the school foundation program would have received that rollover. Now, we're not even talking $1 million at that point. The legislature changed the distribution so that the local governments received 75% of the distribution, and the lottery corporation themselves could retain 25% of their net revenues for reinvestment in their programs. In terms of revenue generation, in very simple terms, if you take total dollars that have been played versus the amount of money that local governments have received, lotteries are returning about 13 cents on the dollar to local governments. There's a flow chart for the distribution in Appendix A, and Table 1 shows you the different revenue per year, the prizes that have been awarded, expenses, which not only include the actual operating expenses of the lottery, but all of the commissions to lottery retailers and other expenses, and then the amounts of money that has been returned to the local governments. If we compare that to other states, 46 other states also have a lottery. Wyoming is the only state that dedicates its lottery revenues to local governments. That's not to say that the other states don't provide for the local governments, but it's not an exclusive. Individually, other states split their revenues almost equally between their general fund and their education spending. And if you look at it by total dollars, the average is about 65% to the state's general fund. And the reason why there's a difference there is it seems as though more states with smaller dollars split differently than states with larger dollars. For example, we're looking at revenues in Wyoming where we have total gaming, say in 2024, our lottery generated gross gaming of 40 million. We're looking at other states that are also doing this, but their revenues in their lottery are $500 million to $2 billion. So when we start looking at that type of number, it really changes where it looks like the dollars are going. But when you look on it a state-by-state basis, you're looking at least 50% of the money going into the general fund, and then the balance of it usually going into education. If you don't mind, I'm going to skip around and skip pari-mutuel funds for the moment, because it's probably best that we handle them separately, because they operate a little different. The second one I want to talk about is skill-based amusement games. Skill-based amusement games were authorized in 2020. 20% of the net proceeds from skill-based amusement game operators is transferred to the Gaming Commission, and those are used to fund the school foundation program and local governments again. In simple terms, if we were to look at it from a gross revenue perspective, instead of from net proceeds, then you're looking about 2.5 cents for every dollar waged in a skill-based amusement game goes to local governments, and the same amount goes to the school foundation program. Since 2020, the school foundation program has received $11.7 million, The cities, towns, and counties, of course, have equal, with the balance for administration going to the Gaming Commission themselves. The interesting thing about this is whenever the gaming account exceeds $500,000, anything in there in that particular account does flow over. When I try to compare skill-based amusement games to other states, it's very difficult. Very few states have skill-based amusement games that they tax directly, because a lot of the states that we're looking at also have slot machines, or they have historic horse racing machines that they are skill-based. And so trying to find a dollar to dollar is a little difficult. It's easier to find it with pari-mutuel specifically, or online sports wagering, or like I said, the lottery directly. If we look at online sports wagering, that was authorized by the legislature in 2021. In that regard, 10% of net proceeds earned by the operators are transferred to the commission. I should have mentioned this with lottery. $200,000 per year of lottery funds of unclaimed tickets is dedicated to mental health. Online sports wagering is the only other dedicated fund for mental health, and that's $300,000 per year. The rest of those funds go into the state's general fund. For the last 2 full years, Wyoming has deposited between $1 million to $1.5 million in its general fund. This translates to about 0.6 cents for every dollar wagered. Comparing that to other states, sports betting is taxed. A lot of states look at their sports betting not only as online, but in retail. The average online sports wagering tax is about 19%. And when a state does have retail and online at differing rates, online generally is between 2 and 5% higher than the retail. So where you may have 8%, you're looking at 13. If you look at the revenues for online sports wagering, those are on table 4, which is the back of page 4, or which is page 4 at the top. And you'll see that wagering activity for 5 years, $629 million, but total revenue to the state is 3.8. Comparing that to
Thank you, Madam Chairman. Sorry to interrupt you. You're doing a phenomenal job. Could you just give us Wyoming's percentage on online sports wagering? You said 19%.
10.
10% is what Wyoming's doing.
10% of net revenues, yes.
Thank you.
You ready for questions? You have more to?
Last one I was going to
Just
go
to
through is
follow up on that.
pari-mutuel.
Okay.
So in the 19% you're talking about, is that net revenues or gross?
Madam Chairman, that is net revenues.
That's the average of all the other states?
That is correct.
Thank you.
Can you restate that?
The average in other states for taxing their online sports wagering or sports wagering in general, sports betting, is an average of 19% of net revenues. Very similar to what we have on skill-based amusement games.
But we in Wyoming have only 10%,
That is correct.
and the average is 19.
There's a couple of states that are at 6.75. The next break is 10, and then 15, 20. There is one state, Illinois, that actually taxes it on a progressive basis, where they start at 25%, and depending upon the revenues generated, tax it up to 40%.
Excellent. All right. Further questions? Can I get a bill draft for increasing it from 10% to 15 to 20?
Madam Chairman, would you
Okay.
like me to discuss pari-mutuel or?
Stand by. I think we'll stick with online sports wagering for right now for this topic to kind of make this manageable, and just drive where it needs to go. And so I heard Representative Storer make the motion to increase the percentage of net proceeds that the state of Wyoming receives from 10% to 20. Is that right, Representative Storer?
So, Madam Co-Chair, I'll second it for discussion. What are the surrounding states, like Colorado, Utah?
Madam Chairman, I have the data.
At your desk?
That I can get for you. I don't have it at my fingertips right now. The surrounding states, I can tell you that none of the surrounding states are lower than 10%.
Or
Are 10% or less. The states where I believe the 6.75, I believe one is Delaware, and I think the other's Kentucky perhaps, but don't quote me on that. I have it over there and I can tell you for sure. But it is, those are the outliers.
So I'm just a follow-up
Representative
question.
Nicholas.
I'm really curious on online sports wagering. Is there a way that we can know where the wagerings are come from? In other words, are they Wyomingites or are they from all over the place?
All over the place. Is that right, Karen? We have representatives from the industry here as well, I think, who
I
can maybe
think that would probably be better because
accurately
of,
provide that.
there's the issue with geolocation as far as our online sports wagering. Those other states, I would defer.
I mean, one of the rationales for why this was even made into law was the failure for Wyoming to have it just meant that our people's tax dollars who were participating in online sports wagering already were just going to go to other states as opposed to us capturing it because, well, the internet, it doesn't have state boundaries. And so it was foolish not to have it in light of the fact that the people of Wyoming or the people visiting Wyoming were participating in online sports wagering. At least that was the rationale provided at the time. So,
So the other thing,
further discussion, Representative Nicholas seconded Representative Storer's motion, and we're on discussion.
well, this is
Yeah.
another question on the discussion. On sports wagering, there's 629 total $1 million in 4 years, right? What do we know what the cost of operation of the business are? And what the prize money is, so that, how that breaks out? Do we have that information?
Madam Chairman, I do have that information at my computer.
You can go back to your computer, just to be easier.
You can forward it to us.
Would you like her to stay up front or at her computer and answer the questions now? Yeah, go to your computer. Let's. I mean, we are doing a bill draft right now. Okay, so, and the bill draft is 20% as a placeholder. Deep breathing exercises. And so, with that bill draft, hopefully we'll get a fiscal note of some sort, estimated impacts with that.
And so I'm curious, Madam Chair, are we going to take public comment on, before we vote on a bill draft?
Yes, we are.
Okay.
Further discussion at this point? Senator Grew?
Yeah, I look forward to hearing the folks from the industry weigh in. As I recall, when we did online sports gaming, it is geo-fenced inside the state. As a matter of fact, the gaming division, I remember them passing out an iPad, and every time someone makes a bet, it comes up on a screen exactly where it's coming from inside the state of Wyoming. And that was, as the good chairman said, that was the reason for passing the legislation in the beginning, was that we could capture that. And so, and I think you'll hear that coming up. So just wanted to clarify that.
Karen, do you have any answers to those questions you'd like to provide now, or we can go to public comment and then come back to you if you'd like?
Madam Chairman, if you want to go to public comment, that would be great, so I can get this set up.
Absolutely.
And get the information.
Yes, yeah, Representative Pendergraft.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Looking at page 5 of this handout, it says nearly all states either direct a portion of state gaming revenues to health, public safety, et cetera. Do we have an approximation of maybe what percentage of the revenues go there? Do we know what the cost is?
Representative Pendergraft, that go where? I didn't hear you, I was coughing. What was the question?
Madam Chair, on page 5 of this handout, it says nearly all states direct a portion of state gaming revenues to health public safety. I'm just wondering what proportion we're looking at out of their revenue.
Mr. Fuller?
Yeah, Madam Chairman, and I would defer to Ms. Vaughn if she has additional information. I think 2 points to that question, Representative Pendergraft. First, in terms of statute, there's $500,000, up to $500,000 that would be made available for the term I would use would be problem gaming. So the $300,000 to the Department of Health from the lottery proceed, or excuse me, from the online sports wagering proceeds, and then up to $200,000 in unclaimed prize money would be available from lottery proceeds, from unclaimed prizes. The second piece of the puzzle, Madam Chairman, Representative Pendergraft, would be whatever local governments, they receive. I don't have that breakdown if any of those funds are devoted to specific public safety initiatives.
Follow-up?
Thank you, Madam Chair. My question was more about, frankly, what are the other states? I'm assuming that the numbers that we've put into this are proportionate to how other states are, and just wanted confirmation of that.
All right, we will get that information. We'll go to public comment right now. Would the gaming industry like to come forward? All right, welcome.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Tracy Laycock, I serve as General Counsel for Wyoming Downs and 307 Horse Racing, which is pari-mutuel wagering, but I've practiced in this industry since 2016. Madam Chair, with respect to the sports wagering, Senator Guru is correct. It is geofenced within the state of Wyoming, which means they can see every time a bet happens and where it happens. And then in addition to that, the tribal lands are actually geofenced where you cannot place a sports wagering bet within that territory.
All right, further public comment? Yes, so right now we are doing a bill draft to increase the percentage of net proceeds that the state of Wyoming would recover from online sports wagering from 10% to 20%. Further discussion on the motion? Seeing none, all those in favor, please say aye. Aye. Any opposed? All right, that motion has passed. Obviously, there'll be a much more detailed discussion at our next meeting concerning that bill draft and the implications of it. And no doubt we'll hear from folks from the online sports wagering industry. Can I hear any additional motions concerning skill-based amusement games? We're only receiving 20% of the net proceeds, which is the broad sense of the we. Of that 20%, 45% goes to the school foundation program. And then of that remainder, 45% to local governments and 10% to the Gaming Commission. So we're only receiving 20% of the net proceeds. Karen, how does that generally compare? And I understand that's very difficult because of very few states only have skill-based games and they have typical slot machines as well. But generally, based on your understanding, is 20% consistent of what other states are taking from the net proceeds?
That, from where states have skill-based games, Madam Chairman, yes, 20% tends to be in line.
You want to keep it 20%, committee? 25? I think the state of Wyoming has been quite generous to the players in this space, giving them almost an exclusive access to the market at an unproliferated rate, having infiltrated every block of all of our communities. I think I would support a bill draft for 25% just to have a conversation.
Good on the table. Good second. I'll move that.
So I would make an amendment to 25% and have that additional 5% go to highways.
I find that friendly. All right, any further discussion, public comment?
Madam Chairman?
Senator Hicks?
Yeah, Madam Chairman, if I may, I had submitted this topic to Cat Finn with Senator Guru because a part of the issue, a very small fraction of the issue that you're grappling with now, and our LSO staff has done an outstanding job. And I think if you go to Appendix E, that's on the website associated with this topic, I think it will get you. So one of the reasons that I had submitted this was part of the rationale was the discussion you're having now. So when you go in there and you look at what we do with the 4 gambling sources that we have, for pari-mutuel, the operators get roughly 85%, skill-based games, the state gets 20%, online wagering 10%. So there's no continuity or consistency across those 3 gambling activities as to how much we do to the operator. And that was one of the things, is to try to look at some consistency and then also bring that back into what we'd say regional or nationwide averages. And so I think you're headed down that track. But I would encourage you to not just get singly focused on online sports wagering. You may want to also look at pari-mutuel.
Senator Hicks, I'm getting there. You'd be comforted to know I have Appendix E up on my computer, and I'm going across the top of that chart from right to left.
Yeah, so that was the first part, Madam Chairman, and I'm glad you're there if the committee can look at that.
So right now, we're on skill-based amusement games, increasing the state's percentage from 20 to 25%, with that 5% additional going to state highways. That's the motion. It's been seconded. We're going to vote on that, and then we'll get to pari-mutuel. All those in favor, please say aye. Oh, we have a comment from the counties who I think probably want a piece of that pie. Mr. Riemann?
Madam Chairwoman, members of the committee, Jeremiah Raymond here on behalf of the county commissioners. I do think that it's appropriate to at least acknowledge, if you're going to put it towards highways, that your counties are responsible for roughly 2/3 of our entire road system in this state. And we have some information that we're working to get to the Transportation Committee that shows there's roughly a $500 million to $1 billion shortfall just on our paved roads in the state of Wyoming, county paved roads. So to the extent that you're going to put it to highways, yes, I would request that you also consider the other local governments that have considerable road systems in this state.
Thank you for that reminder. All right, all those in favor of the motion, please say aye. Aye. Any opposed? All right, that motion has passed. Pari-mutuel. Dun, dun, dun. The most complicated form of gaming we have in the state. And as you look at Appendix E, you can see that being illustrated there. So the question is, how much of the net of pari-mutuel wagering does the state of Wyoming receive?
Madam Chairman.
Karen?
Pari-mutuel wagering is taxed differently than all of the others. And the reason for that, it is taxed at 1.5% of the total handle, which is the gross amount wagered, which is why I provided you that analysis of 2.5 cents, 5 cents, 13 cents. Because if we were to take the gross wager, that's what it translates to on the pari-mutuel side. Because we are taxing it at the gross level and the way pari-mutuel is structured, they do not take out net revenues and distribute anything after net revenues. So that information is not as easily available. Every state looks at gross revenues, and the permittee is allowed to have a retainage or commission of a certain percentage points. So 13%, 19%. From that, the taxes are paid, their revenue is generated. So we don't have the net revenue per dollar wagered. If we were to look at that, Wyoming would get 1.5 cents on the dollar of total wagers, which is the 1.5% that we tax. What that translates to as a net tax to Wyoming after expenses we don't have.
And Karen, is this type of calculation consistent with other states, if you know? Or have we overcomplicated it?
Madam Chairman, the 1.5% of handle and basing everything off of handle is, yes, consistent with the way other states do it. Of course, other states have varying percentages. Most states do have some way to encourage live racing built into their parimutuel program. In some states, that means that it's operated at the same tax rate as they have for historic or simulcast, and they just dedicate a portion of the revenues. Other states take live racing and tax it at a lesser percentage than some of those others. But you're looking at live racing being anywhere from 0.75 to 3%, and for simulcast being roughly the same. Your states that have historic horse racing, there's very few of those that have just historic horse racing that don't also have slot machines or some other form of wagering. And those on average can go up to 5%. I do know of one state that actually says it's 18 to 26%, depending, but by that, you're also taking funds out for the Breeders' Award and other economic development, money going back into the tracks, for example. The other situation that you have with the parimutuel is for example, if it's 3% that goes into the general fund, once those funds go into the general fund, they're no longer tracked as a parimutuel revenue. And so when transfers or appropriations are made back to local governments or the racing industry or the Breeders' Award, we lose track of where those funds came from. But as a general rule, yes, I would say 1 to 3% is on average, with some states, of course, being more. I know of one state that does not tax live racing at all, but instead bases all of their tax on simulcast and historic horse racing revenues. I hope that answered your question.
Yeah, Karen, thank you so much. So it looks like Wyoming is fairly consistent with other states at collecting 3% of the handle. Is that right?
I'm sorry, madam, we collect 1.5% of the handle.
But in total, it's 3%. It's just how it gets distributed. Is that, when I look at Exhibit E, I'm not reading that correctly?
I don't think so.
Because that totals.
The difference, parimutuel has one additional layer on that. Let me just, perhaps I should explain it better. Live racing for parimutuel is at 1.5%, with 1% of that going, 1.5% of a live event going into the parimutuel account. Historic horse racing is also at 1.5%, 1% of it going to the local governments, 0.25% going to the parimutuel account, and 0.25% going to the LSRA.
Can you restate that one more time, all over again?
Sure. Live horse racing, 1.5% of the handle is transferred directly to the Wyoming Gaming Commission. Historic horse racing, 1.5% of the handle is divided 1% to the local governments, 0.25% to the Gaming Commission, and 0.25% to the Wyoming, or to the LSRA. Combined, it's 1.5% on either side. The distribution is just different.
So it wouldn't be unreasonable or inconsistent with other
I
states?
have a motion.
Yeah, great. Representative Nicholas, please proceed.
I would suggest that we draft a bill that add 1%. So it'll be, the total would be 2.5%, and that 1% goes to highways.
Is there a second, or should we just round it out to 3%? Is there a second? Seeing your motion has failed for us. Oh, it's
No,
seconded by
There's a
Senator
couple
Crum.
seconds over.
Is there a friendly motion to make it 3%? So it goes from, if I heard this correctly, according to the research from LSO staff, it's generally the average for historic horse racing, pari-mutuel, that the state recovers approximately 3% of the handle.
And so, by the way, just to clarify the motion, I'm talking about historic horse racing, because that's where the dollars are.
Right.
To churn.
So this is only HHR, and your motion is only increasing it by 1%, even though the average is 3%.
It's a
You
good
want to
place
continue to
start.
give away for free, Representative Nicholas?
Well, 1% would provide roughly $50 million annually to.
What would 3% do?
I'll just add one more.
All right, so the motion is 2.5%, so increasing it by 1% on historic horse racing. There was a second by Senator Crum. Further discussion?
Just a clarifying question. Did you say historic horse racing and simulcast? Is that what they were just saying?
Just
No,
HHR.
Historic horse racing.
Could I amend it to say simulcast as well? Would that be a friendly amendment?
Sure.
And you would be increasing the simulcast fee by 1.5%? Or just 1%?
1%.
Whatever, yeah.
So it'd go from 5% to 6% fee. Okay, that's a friendly motion, or a friendly amendment. Does everyone understand the motion, including LSO? So it's only 2.5%. Public comment?
Thank you, Madam Chair. Tracy Laycock, I serve as General Counsel for Wyoming Downs and 307 Horse Racing. First, I want to talk about that the effective tax rate is actually 1.9% as it currently stands. There's a 1.5% tax that you were given the breakdown for, but in addition, we are required to pay 0.4% to the Breeders' Fund. So that is a required tax. So we are currently taxed at 1.9%. So your motion would effectively make it 2.9%. Additionally, 3% is not the average. 3% is the outlier. I believe there is one state, and I will go and do my homework to make sure I'm correct, but I don't believe that 3% is the average. I was speaking with the director of the Gaming Commission today, and I actually believe that the average is 2%. We're right on target for where the average is. Our taxes get really confusing, but I want to take a moment to talk about where the money goes and how it works, because I think that's important. The first thing to understand is handle. Handle is an interesting concept because it's commonly misconstrued as revenue, but it's not. If you put $1 in a machine and you win $3, and you bet that $3 that you just won, the handle is $4. It's not $1. Okay? So you can see how that number exponentially grows quite quickly. If you bet $1, where does it go? 90% of that dollar, 90 cents of that dollar goes back to the bettor. Pari-mutuel wagering is in a pool. So all the money goes into a pool. 90% of that money can be won. 1.9 cents of that dollar goes to taxes. That's all the taxes we talked today, but we didn't talk about the Breeders' Fund, which is a required tax for us as operators. And then operators get to take the remainder, which is about 7.2%, or 7.2 cents of that dollar. 7.2%, right? So you think, okay, 7.2%. All right, so let's talk about what the operator has to do with that 7.2%. Gaming for horse racing and off-track betting is very different than any other gaming. The reason why we're here today is because our company lives and works here. We employ 400 people in this state. We have 20 corporate officers in this state. We are paying benefits. We're paying life insurance, health insurance for our employees. We have full-time employees, we have part-time employees. We don't just have employees at the track, which is about 400, or excuse me, at the OTBs, but we have an additional 100 seasonal employees that we employ at each of our racetracks. We pay property taxes, we pay leases, we pay all of these things. We have a lot of overhead that we pay. When you take our effective tax rate and you turn it into gross, we are being taxed at about 25 to 30% of our gross. So you have to think about that when you're thinking about businesses in Wyoming, employees in Wyoming, and the taxes we already pay. So I just would ask that you think about that as you think about a tax increase. I think that our taxes are very competitive within the United States. And I think that we have a lot more overhead than many of the other gaming companies that operate in the state.
Representative Bear.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. Ms. Laycock, is it far-fetched to think that an increase in taxation could mean a reduction in the payout? Is that a possibility?
It could, because it could reduce the payout. The other thing you have to think about is how the operator runs their business and is able to effectively run their business within the state.
Do you have follow-up, Representative? What I am looking at is also a comparison between the annual reports. So I went to the Gaming Commission's website to see the pari-mutuel's financial reports. So that's what I'm doing now. I would encourage everybody to do the same.
Madam Chair, I have some quick figures that I can share with the committee.
Yeah.
In 2024, the three operators paid about $5.4 million to the state general fund. They paid $5.3 million to the state LISRA. They paid a little over $11 million to counties where facilities are located, and the city rate is a little bit lower because the facility has to be in the city, but it's functionally, it's a little over, it's about $10.1 million. Just one more comment. I think there was a question earlier from Senator Pendergraph about where the money goes for social services. And I think that the theory behind the taxes for pari-mutuel that's why we give specifically to the cities and the counties, and we give it to them in their general fund so that they can exercise the appropriate discretion on where they feel like they need the funds for having that activity in their city and county.
Further discussion or questions of Ms. Laycock? All right, saying none. Ms. Shaner, anything?
Nothing further to add. Mary Ann Shaner here on behalf of 307 Horse Racing in Wyoming Downs.
All right, any further public comment? The commissioners don't want money for roads? All right. Mr. Downing, welcome.
Greetings. Thank you, Madam Chair. And just going back to the 5% tax increase on the skill games that are located in bars, truck stops, and in charitable nonprofit types of entities. We weren't tracking the possibility of a tax increase discussion today, and so we'll share our concerns with the committee later on as far as the 5% tax increase being proposed. But just to be clear, that type of increase would be borne by those locations that are mainly serving more Wyoming small businesses. I'll let the horse industry and the OTB casinos speak for themselves as far as their side of the street. However, if we do see a tax increase in those areas, just want to be clear that that will be borne by those folks. And we'll also be happy to share later on with the committee individually the impact on their communities by those companies.
Thank you, Mr. Downing. Any questions of Mr. Downing? All right, seeing none, any further public comment? No further public comment? All right, public comment's closed. Committee, back to you. There's been a motion and a second, so we kind of took that out of order, just so you know, from our normal procedure, we typically wouldn't open it up to the public after a second, but in light of kind of the unique nature of how this is rolled out, thought it was appropriate and to break it out. So all those in favor of Representative Nicholas's motion, please say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? All right, that motion has passed. Senator Guru?
Madam Chair, I'd just like to ask for one last bill draft in concept on the historic horse racing. And that would be to kind of go for a two-tiered system. In other words, what's happening right now today to stay static. And then from henceforward, that it would be that all historic horse racing and simulcasting to be taxed locally and at the state level, and then just put XX. And then, so in other words, then we would determine what those two amounts are on everything going forward. Everything looking back stays exactly the same. If there's a second, I'll explain.
Second?
Second. The point here being, and I've been through this on TRW, I've been through it on appropriations, and we've whiffed on everything we've tried to do. So bringing this forward is to circle back and just say, we're missing something. There's a fundamental disconnect. Everything Ms. Laycock says is absolutely true. It's stipulated. It's because we set it up that way. We set it up where money goes to save a sport that we wanted to save at the time we tried to save it. I ask this question every year and I get the same answer. Have we achieved the goal? Horse racing is getting better and better. Purses are going up. Dollars are going up. Everything's going up. But what also is happening, we're getting machines everywhere in our communities, and some community members are really having a hard time with this. And so that's why I want to bring this forward and say, okay, we'll just stipulate everything the way it is now. And if another operator comes in, they've got to have a track and they've got to do all the things they have to do till it gets to a certain number of machines, which we'll identify, and then say, okay, then them going forward. So then everyone has the same playing field if someone comes, new player in the game. But everything going forward needs to be taxed, and the state needs to get its share of it and not just have it go to the way it's going right now. Because right now, the state's paying for consequences and it's not getting the revenue because it didn't ask for it. I'm not blaming anyone. I'm blaming us. We're the ones that set it up the way we set it up. So that's the impetus for this.
So, Madam Chair, in the same vein, when last year, we had a working group and we proposed a moratorium on all new horse racing until we could further study it because it's growing exponentially. You just look at the numbers. We've got a new track going now up in Laramie County, and the makeup of the Gaming Commission, frankly, is pro-racing. It's as opposed to taking the greater good into consideration and where the dollars go. So it's kind of the same concept, but it's I just think that there's something that we ought to consider or talk about.
There's a motion on the floor. Further discussion? Representative Haraldson?
Thank you, Madam Chairwoman. So I think the struggle that I have, and I hear the heart behind it, obviously, I mean, I can pull up a post on a social media group from a person in my community that said, oh, we had so much fun at the new casino in Cheyenne. And you're like, well, we don't legally have casinos, but you know what? Perception is reality. And so we're at this weird place. So the struggle that I have, though, is this. If we're not careful, we do pick a winners and losers game. It's not the industry's fault that we haven't done our job. So we need to do our job so that we can address the industry. And I think that, so to sit there and say, well, you guys can do it and continue as we are, and then we're going to stop anyone new, that is a direct harpering. I mean, that's hampering that entire industry. So either we sit there and say, this is the way it is for everyone, or this is the way it is for no one. I think we need to be careful. We don't sit there and say, well, at this point, we're drawing the line and we're not going to address prior, but we're going to address forward. I don't know. I just think I'm concerned about that and have some heartburn on that.
And Senator Grew, your motion wasn't for a moratorium, is that right?
Madam Chairman, to amplify it, I'm trying to actually do the exact opposite. I'm not trying to pick winners and losers. I'm saying if a new player comes in, they can go with the old system until they have a certain number of machines, and then they would fall under this. The players that are in the game right now, if they add another machine, come under this second tier. So I'm trying to memorialize what Senator Schiffer and Representative Wallace way back when wanted to do, and that's help horse racing. I get it, and we can debate whether that was a good idea or not all day long, but that's where we're at. I was just saying, going forward, we want to look at this in a different way, and we do this a lot where we have two-tiered systems where we grandfather what's been, and then have, based on new realities, what we're facing now. So that's what I'm contemplating here, and not picking winners and losers, and not even picking percentages until we get a chance to talk with the local communities, talk with the vendors and see what they think, and then move forward from there. Thank you, Madam Chair.
All right, further discussion? Does Ellis have a clear understanding of the motion? Yeah? All right, all those in favor say aye.
Aye.
All those opposed?
No.
All right, that motion has failed. Senator Grew? All right, does anyone want to talk about the lottery? Saying no, nobody wants to talk about the lottery. Mr. Riemann? Sure, come on, come forward. Committee, as you look at Appendix E, hopefully you have that up. I think there's a couple things that I take note of for where these revenues go. Only one of them goes to schools. And as we know, that's one of our biggest juggernauts to deal with for how we're going to fund public education long-term. I'm going to call for order here. We're going to quietly hand it out. So Representative Nicholas is always that guy. And then secondly is highways, which we've addressed today. But I just want to kind of, for me, when I look at these revenue locations, and I don't want to take away from local governments or anybody currently here, but to recognize that there does seem to be, we're missing the mark for significant revenue sources for our biggest challenges for long-term finances for the state, which is roads and schools. So want to maybe talk about reprioritizing that or evaluating how that looks. With that, Mr. Riemann?
Thank you, Madam Chairwoman. Again, Jeremiah Riemann here on behalf of the Wyoming County Commissioners Association. And just back to my previous comments, I don't want to minimize the need that the Department of Transportation has. And certainly there are, systems there to share some of their revenues back to us. So I don't want to take away from that. Madam Chairwoman, I bring to you an issue that I first took to the Joint Travel, Recreation, Wildlife, and Cultural Resources Committee, and Senator Hicks suggested that I should come to you because it ultimately relates to the revenue models that we have. And that's an issue relative to problematic gaming. And you talked about it very briefly. In our current statutes, we have 2 of the 4 gaming options here that ultimately fund problematic gaming initiatives in the state of Wyoming. As the document that I gave you with our letterhead on it shows, of the online sports wagering, $300,000 ultimately goes through the Department of Health. So when you see that in the flow charts that you have here, that's ultimately coming to the counties. They're a pass-through agency, and frankly, I think they would tell you that they'd love to get out of that game, that they would love to perhaps have that distributed differently. That $300,000 is distributed out to the counties based on the population of those over 18 within the county. So of course, that looks different across the state. And the second document you have shows what the allocations are for 2025. It is possible for counties to say no in accepting that funding. And over the course of the past few years, we've seen that, on average, 6 to 8 counties do ultimately say no. In 2024, Campbell, Converse, Goshen, Lincoln, Park, and Uinta all denied that funding. What happens is that it then goes back in the pot. So if you added up all those numbers for 2025, it amounts to over $400,000 that is being at least offered up to the counties to offer what is shown at the bottom of the page, health programs to prevent and treat problematic gaming behavior within their communities. Some counties would say they have enough resources to do that with that funding, and others will say it's not enough, and perhaps the language is too restrictive on their ability. If you look at the second page, the lottery, you heard reference, it's $200,000 of unclaimed prize money. That's administered by the lottery itself, and they've set up a coalition to determine how to utilize that funding. And I've had conversations with the Gaming Commission and the lottery over time, and I think we've all said we can do better by our people if we did perhaps a few things. One of those is to consolidate the funding that exists out there. So rather than having these disparate pots that are all over, make it one pot. Perhaps capture gaming revenue from all of the different gaming sources. So HHR and skills revenue does not go to problematic gaming. And so perhaps it's worth considering a look at that. Determine who's best to administer this. Certainly your counties have mental health, substance abuse programs locally, and they may be the right entity, but we're not here to say that we're definitively the right agency, but we should look at that. And then perhaps look at how we can use this funding. Right now, it's very specific or perhaps broad, but unknown how to use it in terms of the lottery monies. And if we could use the funding for our broader mental health and substance abuse activities, that might be an appropriate thing. Because ultimately, we're talking about an addictive behavior, right? And being able to help people before they get into trouble might be an appropriate thing. So again, I've brought this to 3 committees in the last week. It's an issue that we think is important enough to, again, do better by our Wyoming citizens, and would appreciate your consideration of helping us address this issue.
Any questions of Mr. Riemann? All right, seeing none, thank you. Any further actions from the committee? Oh, I'm sorry. Welcome.
Madam Chair, committee members, Stephanie Sandoval from the Wyoming Department of Health. I've been tailgating Jeremiah to the 3 committee meetings to just add a little 2 cents. The Department of Health does serve as the middleman on this particular issue, where we do receive the $300,000. We then make that available to the counties to address problematic gaming issues. And this statute was adopted in 2021. And I believe at that time it was modeled after how prevention funding is distributed. But that prevention funding is in the areas of substance misuse, tobacco prevention, and suicide prevention. The Department of Health does have programmatic areas in all of those issues. We do not, however, have a program to address problematic gambling behavior. So, the department is happy to stay as the middleman. However, I would agree with Jeremiah that there probably are more efficient ways to handle this funding. And so we're happy to step out of that if that is the committee and the legislators' desire. So with that, I'm happy to stand for any questions that the committee may have.
Any questions to the Department of Health? I think, my comments about that are, I understand why you don't want it. The budget is big enough, and you always have to explain how much of those pass-through dollars really aren't yours. And it looks like it is, big picture. And that you don't have a program really to deal with this, and so you're truly a pass-through. However, I think you will soon, in light of the continued proliferation of gaming. That's not going to go away. And so I don't see that we would be dissimilar from other states who have programs managed through the Department of Health to do just this. So I understand that right now it doesn't make sense, but in 2 to 3 years, will it? And what are your thoughts about that?
Madam Chair, thank you for that question, and we have certainly contemplated that, and I think if we, want to look at the bigger picture of this and there were additional dollars allocated, I think it would make sense in light of the fact that this may become a pressing issue in the future. Currently, the department does not gather any data on this, and we could start doing that. Of course, we would need, some resources in that area. But I think to even understand the problem, to your point, I think it could become an issue that it would make sense to have the Department of Health involved. So I think, the point about having it being a broader issue to look at that, see what kind of issue it is, and then determine what appropriate resources should be used to address problematic gaming behavior, that would certainly make sense in the future.
So for clarity, nobody in the state is tracking the data associated with addiction-related behaviors associated with gaming?
Madam Chair, actually, the Wyoming Lottery Commission does track some data on this.
Has anybody asked any of the committees, particularly the Gaming Task Force now, to require this data to be collected? Does anyone know the answer to that? I mean, otherwise, we're appropriating money for no particular purpose that we don't even understand how it's being utilized and haven't identified it as an accurate problem. It's theoretical, although we know that it's not.
Madam Chair, I could offer that the counties are using it to treat their mental health professionals, to train their mental health professionals so they can treat the problematic gambling issues. Also to raise public health awareness with regard to this issue. And then Laramie County actually has conducted an environmental scan to better understand the problem here in Laramie County.
And did the county commissioners do that, Laramie County commissioners?
It was, I don't want to speak for the county specifically, but I do know that the prevention group here does work very closely with their county commissioners, so I'm sure it was probably a joint discussion, and if Jeremiah may know more on that Laramie County piece.
Yeah, Mr. Riemann?
Yeah, Madam Chairwoman, I'm not aware of specific tracking that is being conducted at this point at the county level. I'm certainly happy to make that outreach. We have tried to undertake some efforts to work with the counties to pair them up and make them aware of best practices and ways to work in this particular space. But again, it's difficult for some of those communities that simply just have pennies on the dollar and not enough incentive to get involved in it.
Yeah, go ahead.
Madam Chair, I would also offer one more thing. Some of the counties have contacted us and they've said, we're not sure how to utilize these. And we've also had other counties asking if there may be more funding available. And so we have encouraged those conversations among counties if they were to want to pool their money together, to perhaps more effectively address their local issues. And we have no issue with that whatsoever and would happily support that. And additionally, we do work with the Gaming Commission to explore their resources, since we ourselves don't have a program and they do have some robust resources for people. So we do encourage the counties to reach out to them so that we are helping the counties to make the most of these dollars that they have.
Representative Pendergraft?
Thank you, Madam Chair. I think that now we're getting to where I was at with my earlier question, when we try to decide how much should we tax and where do those tax dollars go without having the data to know what the costs are and who bears those costs. We're just kind of throwing numbers out there. And that's why I asked about other states. Surely they've been through this, and there may be some data, some research out there. And so I'm just asking if anybody knows where to find that. I think we need to see it.
Madam Chairman?
Senator Beitman?
Thank you. Do we have information and hard numbers on who are actually addicted to gambling versus, as a mental health problem versus people that are just plumb bad at math? 33% of Wyoming students are proficient or above in math, 8th grade math. So I'm assuming they don't get probability and statistics very well because they grow up and they end up at the casino and they spend their whole paycheck. So how much of this is an education issue as much as a mental health issue, or do you not have that data?
Madam Chair, Senator Beitman, I think those are great questions for the Lottery Commission and the Gaming Commission. They may track those things, and we're happy to continue our collaboration with them to gather that information for the committee if you'd like, to bring that back to a follow-up meeting.
Yeah, that would be great. Any further discussion? All right, seeing none, thank you. I have an additional topic to bring up, which connects to this, which is that the data associated with the revenue generated from gaming is self-reported. Is that correct? Yeah, the answer is yes. So all of that revenue, and then I'm not suggesting there's anything bad happening, but it's probably prudent that we evaluate that self-report. Yes, Ms. Laycock?
Thank you, Madam Chair. I misunderstood your question. With respect to HHR, it is not self-reported. All of that is gathered by the Gaming Commission. They have access to all of our machines. It's my understanding with skill games, it is self-reported to the Gaming Commission. And then I also believe sports wagering is similar to us in that it's, the data is provided directly. It's my understanding, and someone from skill games can correct me, that they send in an affidavit regarding their net. But because HHR is taxed on handle, which is a reported number, there is no self-reporting for HHR.
Thank you. Representative Nicholas?
So I would suggest that we ask the gaming director to come and present to us at our next meeting, and what they do, how they monitor it, what their expenses are, because I know they have their own internal program in addition to what we contribute to, and then also ask LSO what other states do in terms of how they identify and address.
I think what they have, Representative Nicholas, is called a central monitoring system, using technology placed into the machines. And so a third-party vendor provides central monitoring that can tap into the machines 24/7 and shut them off if there's a concern, and just make sure that it's accurate in providing live information to the commission, to the state, to any governing authority. And that's what the majority of states have in place. Wyoming does not. We attempted to put out an RFP a couple years ago, which failed epically. And I think the commission needs a little more fire under them. And I have a motion that I'd like to make, which is to require a comprehensive central monitoring system to apply to all gaming where relevant. And I think that helps really provide us real-time, accurate, third-party data concerning the revenue generated and provides a more equal playing field. I appreciate the affidavits, real special that those get notarized, but I'm not sure that that is the appropriate method to determine the veracity of a $1 billion annual revenue stream. And so my motion is to require the Gaming Commission to require all of our gaming entities to have a central monitoring system technology in place. And I can work with LSO for a more specific language about that. But I do think that needs to be in statute to really help get Wyoming to where it needs to be based on the level of gaming we have in our state. So I need a second. All right, seconded by Senator Gru. Further discussion? And I'm happy to have the Gaming Commission come and talk about the historical RFP, why we don't require that now, why that's not done now, why we're not consistent with best practices in other states and what that may or may not cost, and where that burden should be allocated. So I look forward to inviting the Director of the Gaming Commission to discuss that particular issue in the event this motion passes. All those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? All right, that motion is passed. Any further discussion on the gaming topic? Senator Hicks, is your hand being, yeah, there we go.
Yeah, Madam Chairman, thank you. One of the things, and this is pertinent, this is in CapFin's purview, if we could have staff put up that Appendix E and the Rube Goldberg machine we have on the distributions. And so if everybody can pull that up. And so what we see is like, let's say local governments are getting distributions from 3 different sources of gaming commission from 2 different sources. We've got money going to LSRA, SAP, the School Foundation Program, General Fund, Department of Health that then passes that through. And so looking at this and then under the capital fin purview of looking at increasing investment returns, it seems to me like one of the things that we would really want to take a look at to improve the efficiency of how these funds are handled. We're talking just the distribution as it is today is a little over $42 million a year. A lot of checks are being wrote. So one of the suggestions that I would put out there is what we would do is run all these all these gaming revenues into a central account within either the agency pool, maybe Pool A, and then make the distributions out of that. And if you change those distributions from a monthly or basis and did those on an annual or biennial basis, basically we have that centralized 42 million today if we'd have done this last year. And then you make those distributions out of there, and it would kind of go back through the normal appropriations process where we at least see how much is going where. And I think that's critically important with the fact that the exponential growth that we're seeing in gaming and just with the actions that the committee's taken today, you've effectively raised that somewhere to the neighborhood of 50 million, assuming that the one revenue bill to increase or to 20% to the states take. But it would be tremendously much more efficient to have all of those 4 sources run into one count, and then the distributions come back out of there. And so I was just looking, if you guys look, we've seen a 54% increase in 4 years to the level of the local government distributions with those 3 sources of funding, which is fine. I'm not opposed to it to go on, but it seems like from an auditor standpoint, from our being able to track what these increases and distributions are, consolidating all of those into a single account and then looking at how we would distribute those back out to those entities. If you do that over a longer period of time, say annually, distributions to local governments out of the gaming account, pretty soon you start to generate a balance in there. The interest income on that stays in the account, starts to cover the state's at least administrative expense associated with all the administration and distribution. But Madam Chairman, please try to simplify that thing and make more sense and improve government efficiency. Something that I hope the committee would take a look at. Thank you.
Sounds like a brilliant idea, Senator Hicks. Do you think Pool A is the right account to dump it all in, or because I don't want to put it in the general fund because it does need to be distributed back out to some of these ideas that we've demonstrated. And so what is the short, and if we did quarterly distributions to those recipients,
Madam Co-Chair, I
Representative
don't think the
Nicholas?
state wants to be involved in being, what we're doing is adding another layer of government that's going to delay the funding, and the numbers are all there. I mean, the idea that the money would come to the state and then we pay it out, that just doesn't make any sense to me.
the ability to earn interest income off of an additional 100 million?
It's not going to be 100 million, but
I don't know, further discussion?
Yeah,
Senator
Madam
Baru?
Chairman,
Senator Hicks?
specific to your question, probably initially you would want to go into the agency pool, given the liquidity nature of what we're dealing with. And a lot of that would come back if we were doing an annual distribution, pool might be appropriate. If we're doing something less than annual, just given the cash flow needs, maybe the agency pool. But I do think there's an opportunity there to capture some investment returns to pay for the state's administrative.
Well, I think the conversation is worthy of an agenda item, seeing that the committee is wearing down rapidly and starting to pack up. I'm not sure, is there any interest in a motion on this particular concept? All right, seeing none, what I would ask LSO to do to just put on the agenda, I think that this is worthy of evaluation, is understanding what that would look like if the state were to capture all of the revenues, what account would be appropriate to capture those revenues, and how quickly we could get them back out as intended. And then getting some feedback from the stakeholders who are the recipients of those funds to hear their concerns. Is that clear for an agenda topic? All right, any additional comments on gaming? And Senator Hicks mentioned something, and I do want to be mindful of that, which is the role of this committee on this topic. There's a number of standing committees that are touching on this topic, and we created a task force to look at this, but I think the elephant has become so large. And in order for us to effectively take it bite by bite, it does require a legislative team effort. And so I think this committee's role is focused on the revenues that gaming receives, and then how those get distributed into our funds for long-term investment strategy and or funding those critical components that we need, such as highways and schools and local government. So I just want to be mindful of what I see as our limitation on the CapFin committee with this topic, and so we don't cross paths and waste very critical resources here. So any further comments? All right, anything on the day? Yeah, Senator Crum, I did realize after I did it, I presented a motion earlier in the day for a bill draft on the conceptual constitutional amendment. Was that it? What was it?
It was this morning. It was a bill that
I didn't take a vote on it.
we didn't vote on it. We, first and second, before lunch.
On the SIPA. It was the SIPA, it was the SIPA bill draft
Yes,
that
yes.
Representative Nicholas was going to work on with Senator Hicks and the treasurer and LSO. So that was the motion. I forgot to take a vote. So all those in favor of that effort to fix the SIPA disaster, please say aye.
Aye.
All right, any opposed? All right, that issue has been cleared up. We'll get a rundown of the day from LSO if you'd like to go over what we accomplished. Treasurer Meyer? Yes.
I don't think you guys have anything to carry forward to the next meeting for an agenda item on the basically going from interest accruals and including a capped spending policy and constitutional amendment. And I suggest you do that. There's a discussion about, well, let's just wait till the federal government does their job on an act of admission. But I want to have some information that essentially Utah did it the other way. And the reason they did do that the other way is so when it got to Congress, Congress wouldn't have the out saying, well, the state hasn't moved on this. Until they do, we don't have to. And I think it would behoove us to actually move forward with that putting on the agenda. So if Congress does it between now and we vote, we will have that trigger that was talked about earlier, that we could move forward. And so I would request that you actually put it on the agenda for the next time. And
The active admission
It's a
item
simple one.
will be on the agenda. That'll be on our agenda throughout in the interim. And we'll get an update from Congress by that time, hopefully. And then Representative Bear will be ready to make a motion. And it may not be what we would refer to as a trigger bill, but perhaps a different definition of the bill. And you'll be ready to go with that, Representative Bear. All right, any additional comments before we get a rundown of our busy day from LSO?
Okay, yep, Madam Chairman, members of the committee has requested 7 bill drafts today. First, a bill draft to repeal SIPA and reverse the veto changes that were made in Senate File 169 from 2025. A bill draft for a proposed constitutional amendment to create a compounding permanent account. And then, Madam Chairman, what I would call a companion bill draft that would amend statute to provide for this permanent account and the investment of funds in that account using an 85-15 portfolio. A bill.
Madam Chairman, I might ask for some clarification, not to contradict Mr. Fuller, but my understanding was the companion statute was not requested in your final motion, that it's the constitutional amendment without a companion.
There's a separate motion.
I think it was a separate motion.
Okay, all right. Thanks. Sorry about that.
Yep. Madam Chairman, a bill draft for online sports wagering to change the revenue from 15% to 20%. A bill draft for skill-based amusement games, increasing that revenue to 20 to 25% with the increase going to highways. A bill draft for HHR to increase that revenue capture by 1%. That's a gross revenue with that increase going to highways. A bill draft to require the use of a central monitoring system for all gaming in Wyoming that's approved and regulated. And then, Madam Chairman, there were 3 items expressly mentioned for inclusion on the next meeting's agenda. The first would be a discussion and overview of the state's reserve accounts associated with permanent funds, associated with that, the 2 bill drafts that were previously discussed today. Second, a discussion of the distribution of gaming funds at the state level and the potential investment of those funds and the timing of distributions of those collected funds. And then just mentioned including the active admission and a potential constitutional change in light of those changes to take place, potentially the timing of a constitutional amendment.
Excellent, Mr. Fuller, thank you. And that's what the Capital Finance and Investments Committee does in one day, with an hour-and-a-half lunch, no less, and starting at 8:30. Appreciate all the hard work of LSO staff. Just phenomenal work today, excellent presentations. Karen, special thank you to you on that gaming presentation. A lot of work went into that. Thank you to the treasurer and committee members for all your hard work and dedication today. We did a lot of heavy work. So we'll see you at the next committee meeting. Thanks for all the expertise in the room. Have a great night.